Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into a low-thatched cottage as winter tightens its grip across the land, and you find yourself waking not to comfort but to a cold so sharp it feels like it has weight. The air inside is no kinder than the air outside, and for a moment you wonder if the walls are doing anything at all. You pull your rough blanket closer, feeling the stiffness of fabric that has held the night's chill. And here is the gentle truth whispered softly. You probably will not survive this without learning very quickly how to endure it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like sharing. Let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights. You blink slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the faint grey light that seeps through the small opening that serves as a window. It is not glass, not really just a thin covering that keeps some wind out and lets a little light in. The morning has arrived, but it does not feel like morning. It feels like the night has simply changed its shade. Your breath lingers in the air, visible curling gently upward before disappearing into the dimness. You notice it because it is one of the few things that moves. Everything else feels still, almost frozen in place. Even the silence has a kind of weight to it. A widely accepted historical detail tells us that many medieval cottages had little to no insulation beyond packed earth, wattle and daub, meaning indoor temperatures in winter could drop dangerously low, sometimes close to the conditions outside. You feel that truth not as a fact, but as a presence that presses against your skin. You shift slightly and the straw beneath you rustles with a dry, brittle sound. It is not a soft bed. It is not even what you would call a bed in your world. It is a layer of straw loosely gathered, covered with a rough cloth that has seen many nights like this one. You can feel the unevenness beneath your weight, small ridges and hollows that do not quite align with your body. There is a faint smell rising from it, earthy, a little sichuan, a reminder that this straw has been used, reused, and perhaps not changed as often as you might hope. You pause, breathing shallowly for a moment, then letting the smell become part of the background because it has to. Somewhere nearby you hear a quiet shifting. Another person. You are not alone here. No one is. In a space like this, privacy is a luxury that does not exist. Bodies share warmth because they must not, because they choose to. A curious little detail sometimes mentioned by researchers is that people in colder regions would often sleep closely packed together, sometimes even sharing bedding with extended family members, simply to conserve heat. It is not about comfort. It is about survival. You feel that now in the faint warmth that lingers beside you, a small fragile buffer against the cold. You pull the covering tighter, tucking it under your chin, though it does little to stop the chill that seeps in through every gap. Your fingers are stiff. You flex them slowly, feeling the dull resistance as if they belong to someone else. You listen. At first there is nothing. Then gradually the sounds begin to emerge. A low creak from the wooden frame of the cottage. A soft tapping as something outside brushes against the wall. The wind steady and patient, pressing its presence against the structure. Historians still argue whether medieval people became fully accustomed to these constant night sounds, or if they lived with a persistent sense of unease, never entirely at peace in such fragile shelters. As you lie there, you realise it's not something you can ignore completely. Each sound asks for your attention, even if only for a moment. Your gaze drifts toward the centre of the room where the hearth sits, now quiet, its fire reduced to a faint glow beneath a layer of ash. It must have burned through the night, or at least as long as it could. Now it rests like everything else, waiting. You consider the effort it would take to rise to stir the embers to coax the fire back to life, but the thought of leaving what little warmth you have makes you hesitate, so you remain still watching, hoping that someone else might move first. The cold does something strange to time. It stretches it. Each second feels longer, more deliberate. You find yourself aware of your own breathing, the slow rhythm of it, the way your chest rises and falls beneath the weight of the blanket. There is another sound now sharper, a faint scratching. You do not need to see it to understand. Small creatures drawn to warmth, to food, to shelter. They move through the edges of this space as if it belongs to them too. It's worth noting that vermin were a common presence in medieval homes, especially during winter months when food stores and warmth attracted mice and other small animals indoors. You feel a slight tension in your body, a quiet alertness, but you do not move. Movement costs warmth. You close your eyes for a moment, then open them again. Sleep is not something that comes easily here. Not in this cold, not in this stillness that feels so fragile it might break with a single loud sound. And yet people did sleep. They had to. You shift again, trying to find a position that holds a little more warmth. Your shoulder presses against another body, and there is a brief exchange of heat, subtle but noticeable. You settle there, letting that shared warmth anchor you. The light grows slightly stronger, though it is still dim. Morning is coming slowly, reluctantly, as if even the sun is unsure about returning to this frozen place. You take a deeper breath, letting the cold air fill your lungs, sharp but clean in its own way. There is a clarity to it, a kind of honesty. Nothing here is hidden, nothing is softened. You are aware in a quiet, steady way that this is only the beginning of the day, that the cold you feel now will follow you, remain with you, shape everything you do until night returns once more. And when it does, you will come back here to this same place, this same straw, this same fragile warmth, and begin again. For now, though, you lie still listening, breathing, waiting. For the moment when someone finally rises, when the fire is stirred, when the day, however harsh, truly begins, you remain where you are for a few moments longer, holding onto that thin pocket of shared warmth, as if it might slip away the instant you move. But eventually someone beside you shifts more deliberately, a quiet signal that the stillness of the night has ended. The straw rustles again, louder this time, and you feel the subtle rearranging of bodies as others begin to wake. There is no sudden rising, no stretching with ease. Instead, waking feels like a slow negotiation with the cold. You sit up carefully, pulling the rough covering around your shoulders, and the air immediately presses against your face sharper now that you're no longer fully tucked away. Your feet touch the ground, and you feel it at once. The packed earth floor holds the night's chill more stubbornly than anything else. It seeps upward through your skin, through your bones, as if the cold has been waiting for this moment. You hesitate just for a second, then stand anyway, because staying still will not make it easier. A commonly accepted detail about medieval cottages is that most floors were made of compacted dirt, sometimes layered with rushes or straw, which offered minimal insulation and often trapped moisture and odours. You notice both. The ground is cold but also faintly damp, carrying a smell that is part earth, part something less pleasant, something that lingers without ever quite disappearing. You glance around the small space. In the dim morning light, the shapes of the room become clearer. Low walls uneven, patched in places. The roof slopes downward, thick with thatch that does its best to keep the worst of the weather out. It works mostly, but not entirely. Another person moves toward the hearth, kneeling with practiced motion. You watch as they brush aside the ash, searching for the faintest hint of life beneath it. There is a quiet patience in the way they do it, as if this is not a task but a ritual repeated every morning without fail. A small glow appears, barely visible, then another. They lean closer, blowing gently, and you see the ember respond, a tiny pulse of orange in the grey. It is fragile, almost uncertain, but it is there. A curious tidbit sometimes mentioned in historical accounts is that maintaining a continuous fire was considered essential, and households would often preserve embers overnight, rather than risk the difficulty of starting a new fire from scratch. Watching now, you understand why. This small glow is not just heat. It is effort saved. It is survival made slightly easier. You step closer, drawn by the promise of warmth, even though it has not yet arrived. Your hands extend instinctively, hovering near the hearth, feeling for any trace of heat. There is some faint but real enough to make your fingers tingle as sensation slowly returns. Behind you others are rising as well. The space fills with quiet movements, soft voices, the sound of fabric shifting, of feet brushing against the ground. There is no rush, but there is also no delay. Everyone knows what the day demands. Historians still debate whether the communal nature of these small living spaces fostered a sense of closeness, or if it simply reinforced the lack of personal space that people endured as a matter of necessity. As you stand there surrounded by others, you feel both at once. There is comfort in not being alone, but also a quiet awareness that there is nowhere to retreat. You pull your clothing tighter around you. Layers are simple, practical. Wool if you're fortunate enough to have it. Linen beneath, rough against the skin. Each layer adds something, though none are enough on their own. You notice how everyone moves with a kind of economy. No wasted gestures. No unnecessary motion. Every action is shaped by the need to conserve warmth to avoid exposure to move through the cold rather than fight it. The fire begins to grow slowly. Small pieces of fuel are added carefully, not all at once. You watch the flame take hold, tentative, at first then stronger licking upward, casting flickering light across the room. The difference is immediate, though still modest. The air near the hearth softens just a little. You step closer again, joining the others who have gathered there, forming a loose circle around the source of warmth. There is something almost instinctive about it, this gathering. No one needs to be told, the body understands before the mind does. You hold your hands out, again turning them slightly to warm each side. The skin stings faintly as it adjusts, a reminder of how cold it has been. You flex your fingers, feeling life return to them in small gradual waves. A faint crackle fills the space as the fire settles into its rhythm. It is not loud, but it is steady, a quiet companion to the morning. The smoke rises, curling upward, finding its way toward the opening in the roof, though not all of it escapes. Some of it lingers, drifting through the room, catching in your throat if you breathe too deeply. You cough once softly, then are just taking smaller breaths. It's widely recognized that smoke inhalation was a constant part of life in such homes as chimneys were often rudimentary or non-existent, allowing fumes to accumulate indoors. You feel that reality in the slight irritation in your eyes, the dryness in your throat. It is not overwhelming, but it is always there. You glance toward the doorway, a simple opening covered by a hanging piece of fabric or wood. It moves slightly with the wind letting in thin threads of cold air that slip across the floor and curl upward. Outside the day is waiting. Work, movement, effort. But for now, there is this brief pause, this moment where the focus is simply on becoming warm enough to begin. Someone beside you murmurs something quietly. A few words exchanged low and calm. There is no urgency in the tone, just acknowledgement. You respond in kind, your voice softer than usual, as if the space itself asks for it. You notice how sound behaves here. It does not carry far, it stays close contained within the small boundaries of the cottage. Even conversation feels intimate, even when it is not meant to be. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the stiffness in your legs, the lingering heaviness of sleep that was never quite restful. Your body is awake, but not fully ready. It will take time. And time here is something you move through slowly, step by step, breath by breath. The fire grows a little stronger. The light becomes steadier. The shapes of the room sharpen. Morning, in its quiet, persistent way, has arrived. You stand there, hands extended, surrounded by others, doing the same, all of you, drawing what you can from this small shared source of warmth. It is not much, but it is enough to begin again. You stay close to the hearth, letting that modest warmth slowly work its way into your hands, your face, the surface of your skin. It does not reach deep, not yet, but even this small change feels significant. The difference between cold and slightly less cold becomes something you learn to appreciate very quickly. The fire crackles softly, and with each passing moment it grows a little more confident. Someone adds another piece of wood, carefully placed, as if too much too soon might overwhelm the fragile flame. You watch the way the fire takes hold, how it consumes slowly, deliberately turning solid wood into heat light and drifting smoke. Your eyes follow that smoke as it rises, curling and spreading beneath the low roof before finding its way out through the small opening above. Not all of it escapes. Some of it lingers, forming a thin haze that softens the edges of everything. You breathe it in without thinking at first, then notice the taste. Slightly bitter, dry, with a faint sharpness that settles at the back of your throat. You swallow, then adjust your breathing again, slower, shallower. A well-established historical observation is that many medieval homes lacked proper chimneys, relying instead on simple vents or holes in the roof, which meant smoke frequently accumulated inside living spaces. Over time, this exposure shaped daily life in ways that people may not have even fully recognized. You feel it now not as a distant fact, but as a constant presence that shares the air with you. You blink a few times, your eyes watering slightly, then focus again on the fire. The light it gives is uneven flickering, creating shifting shadows that move across the walls. Nothing stays still for long. Even in this quiet moment, the space feels alive with subtle motion. Behind you, someone coughs, a low familiar sound, not sharp, not alarming, just part of the rhythm of the morning. Another person clears their throat, then settles into silence again. There is a strange comfort in how ordinary it all feels. Some scholars have pointed out an unusual detail that long-term exposure to indoor smoke may have led to certain adaptations in medieval populations, with people becoming somewhat accustomed to the irritation, even if it still carried health risks. You consider that as you take another careful breath, wondering how long it takes before something like this becomes normal. You shift your stance slightly, turning one side of your body closer to the fire than the other. It is a quiet dance, this slow rotation, each person adjusting in small ways to make the most of the heat. No one speaks about it. It simply happens. Your clothing begins to feel different as it warms, the stiffness easing just a little. The fibres soften, the chill loosens its grip. It is not comfort, not in the way you might know it, but it is relief. You glance toward the roof again, noticing the darkened beams above. The wood is stained almost black in places, a result of years of smoke passing over it, settling, leaving its mark. Historians still argue whether the build-up of soot and smoke residue might have had some protective effects, such as preserving the wood from pests or decay, or if it was simply another unavoidable consequence of indoor fires. Either way, you can see the evidence of it everywhere around you. The air shifts slightly as the door covering moves again. A thin draft slips through, brushing against your ankles, reminding you that the cold outside has not gone anywhere. It waits patiently, pressing against every weak point in the structure. You pull your garment closer around your shoulders, tucking it in, trying to hold on to what warmth you have gained. It is a constant balancing act. Gain a little heat, lose a little, adjust, repeat. Someone moves past you, stepping toward the doorway, lifting the covering just enough to slip outside. For a brief moment, a stronger gust of cold air enters, sharper, more immediate. You feel it cut through the room, stealing some of the warmth, making the fire seem suddenly smaller. Then the covering falls back into place and the space settles again. You watch the fire carefully now, as if willing it to grow stronger, to push back against that cold. It responds slowly, steadily, as more fuel is added, as the embers beneath it continue to glow. The sound of it becomes more pronounced, a steady crackle, the occasional soft pop. It fills the quiet in a way that feels reassuring. As long as the fire lives, there is something to hold on to. You extend your hands again, closer this time, feeling the heat more clearly now. It reaches your skin, warming it, bringing with it a slight sting. As sensation fully returns, you welcome it anyway. There is a faint smell that comes with it too, not just smoke, but something else. Wood, yes, but also traces of what has been burned here before. Food, perhaps. Scraps. Small pieces of daily life transformed into ash. You take a slow breath, letting all of it settle around you. The warmth, the smoke, the dim light. It is not separate from you. It becomes part of your experience, something you move within rather than observe from a distance. Another quiet murmur of voices rises, then fades. Someone shifts a piece of wood. Someone else adjusts their clothing. Small movements, constant, necessary. You realize in a quiet, steady way that this is how the day begins. Not with ease, not with comfort, but with a gradual negotiation with the elements. You do not conquer the cold. You learn to live alongside it. The fire continues to grow, the light steadies, and the room becomes just a little more bearable. You stand there breathing carefully, eyes half focused on the flames, letting their movement draw your attention in a gentle, almost hypnotic way. Outside, the wind continues its quiet persistence. Inside, the smoke curls, the fire breathes, and you begin slowly to feel awake. You drift a little farther from the hearth, not because you want to, but because others press closer, each person drawn inward by the same quiet need. The warmth is never evenly shared. It shifts, it concentrates, it belongs most to those nearest the flame. So you step back just slightly and feel the difference at once. The air cools again as you move away, the heat fading quickly, as if it had never fully settled into you at all. You pull your garment tighter, adjusting it with practiced hands, folding one layer over another, sealing what little warmth remains close to your body. Your attention turns toward the walls. They are not smooth, not straight. The surface is uneven, patched with care, but never perfected. You can see where repairs have been made, where new material has been pressed into old, where cracks have been filled and then opened again. A commonly accepted understanding of medieval construction tells us that cottages were often built using wattle and daub, a woven wooden frame packed with a mixture of mud straw and other organic materials which provided some shelter, but little true insulation. As you look at the wall nearest you, you can almost trace the path of the cold through its subtle lines where the chill seeps inward. You step closer and lift your hand, hesitating for just a moment before pressing your fingers lightly against the surface. It feels firm but not solid in the way you might expect. There is a faint coolness to it, a quiet reminder that beyond this thin barrier, winter waits without pause. A soft sound reaches you, distant but distinct. The wind shifting direction. It moves differently now, brushing along the outer walls, finding small gaps, testing every edge. You can hear it more clearly than before, a low, steady whisper that never quite stops. Some historians have suggested that people living in such structures developed an acute awareness of environmental sounds, reading subtle changes in wind and weather as part of daily life. As you listen, you begin to understand how that awareness might grow. The cottage does not fully separate you from the outside world. It filters it, softens it, but never silences it. You move again slowly, your feet careful on the uneven floor. A layer of rushes has been spread in places, though not evenly. Some areas are covered, others worn down to the bare earth. You notice how the rushes shift under your weight, releasing a faint scent, dry and slightly sweet, mixed with something older beneath it. There is a lesser-known detail that in some homes, these floor coverings were only replaced occasionally, allowing layers to build up over time, creating a mixture of plant matter, dirt, and whatever else had settled there. You pause, considering that, then decide not to think too closely about it. Some things are easier to accept without examination. You glance toward the doorway again. It remains closed, but not sealed. A thin line of light cuts along the edge where the covering does not quite meet the frame. It flickers slightly as the wind moves outside, a subtle rhythm that draws your eye. You listen more carefully now. There are other sounds beyond the wind, faint, irregular. The distant movement of something alive, perhaps an animal, perhaps more than one. The countryside does not sleep in the same way people do. It continues quietly, steadily, even through the cold. Scholars have long debated how secure these cottages truly were at night, with some arguing that their simplicity made them vulnerable to both wildlife and human threats, while others suggest that their very modesty offered a kind of protection by attracting little attention. As you stand here listening to the faint sounds beyond the walls, you feel a quiet uncertainty, not fear exactly, but awareness. You shift your weight again, stepping carefully to avoid a particularly uneven patch of ground. Your body is beginning to wake more fully now, the stiffness easing just a little, though the cold still lingers in your limbs. Behind you, the fire continues its steady work. The crackling has become more consistent, the light more stable. It casts long, wavering shadows across the walls, making the space feel both larger and smaller at the same time. You notice how the light catches on the surfaces around you. The rough texture of the walls, the edges of simple wooden objects, the folds of clothing. Nothing is polished, nothing is decorative. Everything serves a purpose, and that purpose is clear. You draw a slow breath, then another, letting the rhythm of it settle you. The air still carries smoke, but you've adjusted to it now, your body finding a way to exist within it without constant discomfort. There is a quiet moment, a pause where no one speaks, where the only sounds are the fire, the wind, and the faint movements of those around you. It is not silence, but it feels close. You find yourself listening more deeply, noticing the layers within those sounds. The difference between a gust of wind and a softer current. The way the fire shifts when a piece of wood settles. The subtle movements of others as they adjust, step, breathe. This is a kind of awareness that grows slowly, shaped by repetition, by necessity. You begin to understand how each small detail becomes meaningful, how each sound carries information, however subtle. You glance once more at the wall, at the thin boundary between you and the cold beyond. It holds for now. It always has in its own imperfect way. And you realize quietly that survival here is not about eliminating discomfort. It's about learning its patterns, recognizing its presence, and continuing anyway. You turn back towards the hearth, drawn again to its steady glow, ready to reclaim what little warmth you can before the day fully takes hold. You edge back toward the hearth again, drawn by its steady glow like everyone else in the room. It is almost instinctive now, this slow orbit around warmth. You notice how no one claims a fixed place. Positions shift quietly without conflict as each person takes a turn closer to the fire and then eases away. Your hands find the heat again, and this time it feels slightly stronger, more certain. The fire has settled into itself, no longer fragile, no longer at risk of fading with a single careless movement. It breathes steadily, feeding on the small pieces of wood offered to it. You take a moment to look down at what you're wearing. The layers are simple, but each one matters. A rough linen layer close to your skin, stiff and not entirely comfortable, but necessary. Over that wool, thicker, heavier, holding warmth. Better, though still far from perfect. You pull at the edge of your sleeve, feeling the texture between your fingers. It is coarse, slightly uneven, the result of handwork rather than precision, and yet it does its job. A broadly accepted historical point tells us that wool was one of the most important materials for winter clothing in medieval Europe, valued for its ability to retain heat even when damp. As you stand here, you begin to understand why. The wool does not eliminate the cold, but it slows, it gives you time, gives your body something to hold on to. You adjust the layers, again tucking them closer around your wrists, your neck, sealing small openings where the cold might slip in. It's a constant process, these small corrections, these quiet attempts to maintain a fragile balance. A faint draft brushes past you again, curling around your ankles, and you feel it immediately. It finds every weakness, every gap. You shift your stance, turning slightly, letting the thicker part of your clothing face the direction of the draft. Nearby, someone pulls a heavier covering around their shoulders, something thicker, perhaps a cloak or a piece of fur. You glance at it briefly, noticing how it drapes more heavily, how it seems to hold warmth more effectively. A lesser-known detail often mentioned in historical studies is that fur linings and animal skins were sometimes used by those who could afford them, offering better insulation than woven fabrics alone. You feel a quiet awareness of the difference, not as envy exactly, but as recognition. You move your hands closer to the fire again, rotating them slowly, feeling the heat spread across your skin. It reaches your palms first, then your fingers, then the backs of your hands. You turn them again, careful not to get too close, careful not to waste the opportunity. Behind you, someone steps away from the hearth and another takes their place. The movement is smooth, unspoken. It happens as naturally as breathing. There is a soft murmur of voices, again low and steady. Conversation here is never loud, never rushed. It flows gently, rising and falling like the fire itself. Some scholars have long discussed whether the need to conserve energy and warmth influenced the quieter, more measured way people spoke and moved in such environments. As you listen, it feels plausible. Even sound seems to carry weight here, something to be used carefully. You glance down again at your feet. Simple coverings, if any. Perhaps a wrap of cloth, perhaps something thicker if you're fortunate. But even then, the cold from the ground never fully disappears. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the discomfort, trying to keep the blood moving. It helps a little. The fire gives a sudden soft pop, a small burst of sparks rising briefly before fading. You watch them disappear, your eyes following their path for just a moment. There is something calming about it, the predictability of the fire's behaviour. It grows, it settles, it shifts, but it does so within a pattern you can begin to understand. You take a deeper breath, then another, letting the warmth reach a little further into you now. It is still limited, still fragile, but it is there. The smell of smoke lingers mixed with the faint scent of wool of earth of people. It is not unpleasant anymore. It has become part of the environment, something your senses have adjusted to. You notice how your shoulders feel slightly less tense. Now how your movements come a little more easily. The cold is still present, but it no longer dominates every sensation. You pull your garment closer one more time, securing it, making sure it sits properly, that it covers what it can. Historians continue to question how effective these layered clothing systems truly were in the harshest winters, or whether survival depended more on constant movement and shared warmth than on the garments themselves. As you stand here, you suspect it is a combination of all three. Nothing here works alone. The fire, the clothing, the closeness of others, each plays a part, each contributes something small that adds up to something just enough. You glance around the room again, taking in the slow rhythm of it all. The careful movements, the quiet exchanges, the shared focus on warmth and readiness. Scarcity. Outside, the day is still waiting, cold and unyielding. Inside, you prepare for it in these small, deliberate ways, gathering what warmth you can, holding on to it, knowing it will have to last. You flex your fingers once more, feeling the last of the stiffness fade, and take another steady breath. It is not comfort, but it is enough. You remain near the hearth a while longer, letting the warmth settle into your hands and face, but soon your attention shifts to the fire itself. It is no longer fragile, yet it is far from secure. It demands constant care, constant attention, as if it might fade the moment it is forgotten. Someone kneels again, adjusting the wood with quiet precision. You watch closely now, noticing the small decisions being made. Which piece to place, where to place it, how to angle it so the flame takes hold without smothering itself. There is a rhythm to it, almost like a craft learned through repetition rather than instruction. A well-documented historical observation explains that the hearth was the centre of daily life in medieval homes, not just for warmth, but for cooking, light and social gathering. It was both practical and symbolic, a place where life was sustained in multiple ways at once. As you stand here, you feel how true that is. Everything seems to revolve around this small, controlled fire. The heat it gives is uneven. Strong close to the flames, fading quickly just a few steps away. You notice how people position themselves carefully, turning slightly, stepping in, stepping out, always adjusting. You try it yourself, shifting a little closer, then turning your side toward the heat. It warms one half of you while the other remains cool. You turn again slowly, letting the warmth reach different parts of your body in turn. It is not efficient, but it is what is available. A faint glow still lingers beneath the main flame deeper in the hearth. The embers, steady and patient, hold more heat than they seem to show. You realize that the visible fire is only part of the story. Much of the warmth is hidden, stored below, waiting. A curious detail noted in some studies is that embers could retain heat for many hours, even overnight, making them a reliable source for rekindling fires each morning. You think back to earlier, to the small glow that was coaxed back to life, and it begins to make more sense. You crouch slightly, bringing your hands lower, closer to those deeper coals. The warmth there feels different, less sharp, more constant. It seeps into your skin rather than striking it. You hold your hands there for a moment longer, then rise again, careful not to disturb anything. Behind you, someone brings a small bundle of additional fuel, placing it nearby. Not too much, never too much at once. Everything is measured not in exact amounts, but in careful judgment. Some historians have suggested that managing a fire in such conditions was a skill passed down through observation and experience rather than formal teaching, with each household developing its own subtle techniques. As you watch the quiet coordination around you, it feels like a shared understanding rather than a set of instructions. The smoke continues to rise thicker now that the fire is stronger. It gathers near the roof before drifting outward. though some of it lingers, forming a thin veil that softens the light. You notice how it changes the way the room looks. Edges blur slightly. Movement becomes less defined. It creates a sense of distance even within this small space. You blink again, your eyes adjusting, then look back to the flames. There is a comfort in watching them. The steady movement, the predictable way they consume what is given to them. It draws your attention in quieting your thoughts for a moment. You hear a faint shift behind you, someone stepping closer, joining the small circle around the hearth. There is no need to look. You can feel the change in space, the subtle redistribution of warmth. You step slightly to one side, making room without being asked. The floor beneath you is still cold, though the area near the hearth is a little less so. You notice the difference with each step. A small radius of relief surrounded by the constant chill. Historians still debate how effective these indoor fires truly were at warming entire spaces, with many suggesting that only those very close to the hearth experienced meaningful heat, while the rest of the room remained cold. As you stand here, it feels accurate. The warmth is real but limited, always just out of reach unless you remain close. You pull your clothing tighter again, instinctively protecting what warmth you have gathered. It is easy to lose, difficult to regain. The fire gives another soft crack, a piece of wood shifting as it burns. You watch it settle, the flame adjusting, continuing its steady work. There is a quiet cooperation in the way everyone tends to it. No single person controls the fire entirely. It belongs to the group, maintained by small contributions from each. You take a slow breath, then another, letting the warmth and smoke fill your awareness without overwhelming it. Outside, the wind continues, pressing against the walls, testing the edges of this fragile shelter. Inside, the fire answers in its own way, not by pushing the cold away completely, but by offering a small, steady resistance. You stand there, part of that balance now, sharing in the effort, the attention, the quiet understanding that this fire must be kept alive. Because without it, the cold would not just return. It would take everything. You begin to notice that not by sight at first, but by sound. A faint scratching somewhere close to the edge of the room. It is soft, irregular, easy to miss if your attention is elsewhere. But once you hear it, you cannot quite ignore it. It repeats pauses, then resumes, as if something small is moving carefully through the shadows. You remain still listening. The fire continues its quiet rhythm behind you, but this sound belongs to something else entirely. Something that does not gather around warmth in the same way you do, but seeks it all the same. Your eyes drift toward the darker corner of the cottage where the light from the hearth fades into uneven shadow. You narrow your focus, waiting, and for a brief moment you see it. A quick movement low to the ground, gone almost as soon as it appears. You do not react outwardly, no sudden movement, no sharp breath, just a quiet recognition. A well-supported observation in historical accounts tells us that vermin were a persistent presence in medieval homes, particularly during winter, when food stores and warmth drew mice, rats, and insects indoors. It was not an unusual occurrence. It was part of the environment. You shift your weight slightly, careful, controlled. The straw beneath your feet gives a faint rustle, and the sound in the corner pauses, as if whatever is there has noticed you as well. There is a strange balance here. You are aware of them, and they are aware of you. Neither side fully retreating, neither side fully advancing. A lesser-known detail, sometimes mentioned in passing, is that cats were occasionally kept not for companionship, but for practical reasons, their presence helping to control these small intruders. You glance briefly around the room, half expecting to see one, but there is none here. Or if there is, it is not visible at this moment. The scratching resumes quieter now further back. Perhaps it has moved away, or perhaps it is simply adjusted, finding a new path. You draw a slow breath, letting it out gently. This is not something that disrupts the morning. It is something that exists alongside it. You step carefully, choosing where you place your feet, aware now that the floor is not only uneven, but shared in ways you cannot always see. The rushes shift again, releasing that faint dry scent, but beneath it there is something else now. A sharper note, subtle but present. You do not dwell on it. There is a perspective among historians that people living in such conditions developed a level of tolerance to these realities that would feel unfamiliar today, not because they were unaware, but because constant exposure left little room for reaction. As you stand here, you begin to understand that quiet acceptance. It is not indifference, it is adaptation. Another small movement catches your attention, this time closer. You glance down, and for a brief moment you see a small shape dart across the edge of your vision, disappearing beneath a cluster of straw. Your body tenses just slightly, then relaxes again. It is quick, it does not linger, it does not challenge you. You shift your foot, brushing the area lightly, not to chase it away, but to remind yourself of where it might be. The motion is subtle, almost absent-minded. Behind you, the fire continues to crackle, steady and unchanged by any of this. The warmth remains, the light flickers, and the morning continues. You notice how no one else reacts strongly either. Perhaps they have seen it, perhaps they have not, but there is no alarm, no sudden movement, just the same quiet rhythm of preparation, of waking, of gathering warmth. Scholars have long considered whether the presence of vermin significantly impacted sleep quality, or if it simply became another background condition that people adjusted to over time. As you reflect on the night that has just passed, you realize that if you heard anything, you did not fully wake for it. Or if you did, it blended into the many other small disturbances that shaped sleep here. You glance again toward the darker corners, your eyes adjusting to the shifting light. These shadows seem deeper now, more defined as the fire grows brighter, but they are still incomplete, still holding small movements you cannot always track. You pull your garment a little closer, not from fear, but from habit. It is a small gesture, protective grounding. There is something humbling in this quiet coexistence. You're not alone here, not even within these walls. The space is shared in ways both visible and hidden. You take another slow breath, letting your awareness settle, letting the tension ease. The scratching fades again, replaced by the more familiar sounds of the room. The fire, the soft movements of others, the distant wind pressing against the cottage. You step back towards the hearth, once more drawn again to the warmth, to the light, to the sense of control it offers, however limited. Behind you in the shadows, life continues in its own small, quiet way. And you, like everything else here, learn to live alongside it. You begin to feel it not as a sudden change, but as something that has been there all along, slowly making itself known. A heaviness in your chest when you take a deeper breath, a faint tightness in your throat that was not there before. It is subtle at first, easy to dismiss, but it lingers. You draw in another breath, careful this time, measuring it. The air is still cold, still touched by smoke, still carrying the quiet weight of the room. But now you notice how it settles differently inside you. You shift your shoulders slightly, rolling them back as if that might ease the sensation. It helps a little, or perhaps you simply adjust to it. There is a long-standing historical understanding that winter conditions in medieval environments often contributed to increased illness, particularly respiratory issues as cold air damp, living conditions and indoor smoke combine to weaken the body. You feel that combination now, not as a dramatic sickness, but as a quiet strain, a subtle reminder that the body is working harder than usual. You glance around the room. Others move as they have before, but you begin to notice small details you had not focused on earlier. A lingering cough from one person, repeated but controlled. Another person rubbing their hands together, not just for warmth, but with a certain stiffness that suggests discomfort, deeper than the cold alone. The fire continues its steady presence, but it does not erase these things. It softens them perhaps, but does not remove them. You lift a hand to your chest, pressing lightly, feeling the rise and fall of your breathing. It is steady, but not entirely easy. There is a slight resistance, a subtle effort behind each breath that you cannot quite ignore. A curious note found in some medical interpretations of the period suggests that people often viewed illness through a balance of humours, believing that cold and damp conditions could disturb the body's internal harmony. You consider that idea not as a theory to accept or reject, but as a way people might have understood what you are feeling now. You shift your weight again, moving a little closer to the hearth, seeking more warmth, as if it might ease the sensation. The heat reaches your face, your hands, but your chest remains aware of the air you are breathing. You cough once softly, more out of instinct than necessity. The sound is quiet, quickly absorbed into the space around you. No one reacts. It is not unusual. Some historians have reflected on how common minor ailments must have been during long winters with limited remedies available beyond rest warmth and simple herbal preparations. As you stand here, you realize how little separates comfort from discomfort, health from illness. You take another breath, slower this time, letting it out gradually. There is a rhythm to it, something you can control even if the conditions themselves remain unchanged. The air shifts slightly as someone opens the doorway again. A brief exchange of cold air enters sharper, cleaner, in a way though harsher as well. You feel it immediately, and for a moment your breathing changes, reacting to the sudden difference. Then the doorway closes and the room returns to its familiar state. You notice how your body responds to these changes, how quickly it adjusts, how it tries to find balance even in less than ideal conditions. It is not perfect, but it is persistent. Scholars continue to examine whether repeated exposure to such environments strengthened resilience over time, or simply meant that people endured a constant baseline of discomfort. As you stand here, you sense that it might be both. You lower your hand from your chest and extend it again toward the fire, focusing on the warmth, letting it ground you. The sensation is immediate, tangible, something you can rely on. Around you, the morning continues to unfold. Movements become slightly more purposeful now. The slow transition from waking to readiness is nearly complete. You take another breath, testing it, feeling the air move in and out. It is not entirely comfortable, but it is manageable. You adjust your clothing again, pulling it closer, covering what you can, protecting your body from the cold that still presses in from every side. There is a quiet acceptance in this moment. Not resignation, but recognition. This is how it is. This is what the body must work through. You glance once more at the others, noticing how they carry on, how they move, how they breathe. Each person adjusting in their own way, each body finding its own balance within the same shared conditions. You take one more slow breath, letting it settle, then release it gently. The heaviness remains, but it no longer surprises you. It becomes part of the morning, just as the cold, the smoke, and the dim light have already become, and you stand there steady, aware, ready to continue. You begin to notice how the light itself behaves inside this space, how it never fully arrives even as morning settles in. It filters through the small opening in the wall in a thin, muted stream, pale and hesitant as though it has already been weakened by the cold outside. You turn your head to slightly, watching how that light stretches across the room, touching the edges of objects but never quite filling them. It does not brighten the space so much as reveal it in pieces. A corner here, a surface there, always incomplete. The fire remains the stronger source, its glow warmer, more alive though limited in reach. Between the two, a balance forms. Not true illumination, but something enough to see by enough to move without stumbling most of the time. A widely recognized detail of medieval daily life is that artificial lighting was scarce and often expensive, relying on candles made from tallow or beeswax, or simple oil lamps, which meant that many households depended heavily on daylight and hearth fire for visibility. As you stand here, you understand how different that makes everything feel. Light is not constant. It is something that comes and goes, something to be used carefully. You step a little farther from the hearth, again testing how far the light reaches. The shadows deepen quickly, gathering in the corners, stretching along the floor, shifting with every movement of the flame. Your eyes adjust slowly, learning to read the dimness. Shapes become clearer, edges, more defined though never fully sharp. You find yourself relying on memory as much as sight, recalling where things are rather than always seeing them directly. A small object catches your attention resting near the wall. You move closer, careful with each step, and bend slightly to look. It is simple, worn, its purpose clear, but it is detail softened by time and use. You reach up, peek out, touching it lightly, confirming what your eyes only partially revealed. There is a quiet satisfaction in that, in the act of knowing something through more than one sense. Some historians have suggested that people living in such low-light conditions developed a heightened reliance on touch and spatial memory, navigating their environments with a familiarity that reduced the need for constant visual clarity. As you move through the space now, it begins to feel true. You do not need to see everything to understand where you are. You straighten again, turning back toward the center of the room. The fire flickers, casting moving patterns across the walls. The light shifts constantly, never settling, always changing. There is a certain calm in that movement. It gives the space a quiet rhythm, a pulse that you can follow without thinking too much about it. A lesser-known detail often noted in passing is that tallow candles, when used, produce their own smoke and smell, sometimes adding to the already heavy air inside these homes. You imagine that briefly another layer of haze, another scent mingling with the others, and you find yourself almost grateful for the limited light you have now. You step closer to the hearth again, drawn not just by the warmth, but by the clarity it offers. Here things are easier to see. The flames define shapes more clearly, the light stronger, more reliable. You hold your hands out again, though less for warmth this time, and more for the comfort of being near something steady. Scholars have long discussed whether the dimness of medieval interiors influenced sleep patterns, with some suggesting that the gradual fading of light in the evening naturally encouraged rest, while others argue that interrupted sleep was shaped more by social and environmental factors. As you stand here, you think of the night that has just passed, of how sleep came and went, never fully settling, never fully leaving. The memory lingers, not sharply, but as a soft impression. The darkness, the cold, the quiet sounds that fill the space. You blink slowly, bringing your focus back to the present. The light has grown slightly stronger now, though still far from bright. It reaches a little farther across the floor, touches more of the walls, reveals more of the space. You take a few steps, testing your movement, letting your body adjust fully to being awake. The stiffness has eased, though not completely. Your limbs respond more easily now your balance steadier. You notice how everyone else moves with similar care. Each person aware of the space, of the light, of the shifting boundaries between what can be seen clearly and what must be remembered. There is no rush here, no sudden burst of activity. The morning unfolds slowly, guided by the gradual increase of light, by the steady presence of the fire. You pause near the edge of the room, looking once more at the thin stream of daylight entering through the opening. It is brighter now, though still soft, still filtered. Outside, the world is waking as well, though you can only sense it, not fully see it yet. Inside, you remain within this dim flickering space, moving carefully, breathing steadily, adjusting to a world where light is never guaranteed, only borrowed. And you begin to understand how even this limited light becomes enough, simply because it must be. You notice it not as a single moment, but as a pattern that reveals itself slowly. You had slept, yes, but not in the deep, unbroken way you might expect. Instead, the night had come in pieces, fragments of rest stitched together by periods of quiet wakefulness. As you stand now fully aware of the morning, you find yourself remembering those small awakenings. The way your eyes opened briefly to the dim glow of embers. The way your body shifted, adjusting to the cold, then settled again. You did not question it at the time. It felt natural. It felt expected. A well-accepted insight among historians is that many people in pre-industrial societies practiced what is often called segmented sleep, dividing the night into two distinct periods of rest separated by a span of wakefulness. This was not seen as unusual, but rather as part of the normal rhythm of life. As you reflect on the night behind you, you realize that you have already experienced it without naming it. You recall how the first stretch of sleep came early, drawn on by darkness and the quiet of the room. Then at some point you woke, not abruptly, not with alarm, but gently, as if your body had decided it was time. You remember lying there, eyes open, listening. The fire had been lower, then reduced to a soft glow. The sounds of the cottage had been different. Slower, quieter, more spaced out. A shift here, a breath there, the faint movement of something in the straw. There is a small but intriguing detail that appears in some accounts, suggesting that people sometimes use this waking period for quiet activities such as prayer, reflection, or even simple tasks that did not require much light. You think about that now, about how natural it might feel to exist in that in-between space. Neither fully asleep nor fully awake. You shift your stance slightly, grounding yourself in the present again, but the memory lingers. The second stretch of sleep had come later, softer, perhaps shaped by the cold, by the position of your body, by the quiet awareness that morning would eventually arrive. It had not been uninterrupted. There were small disturbances, a shift of someone beside you, a change in the air, a faint sound that reached you just enough to stir you, then faded before it fully woke you. You realize now that sleep here is not about escaping the environment. It is about existing within it. Some scholars continue to explore whether this pattern of sleep was driven primarily by natural light cycles or by the conditions of daily life, including temperature, noise, and shared spaces. As you consider your own experience, it feels like a combination of all these elements. You glance around the room again, noticing how others move, how their faces carry the same quiet signs of partial rest. No one appears fully refreshed, but no one seems entirely exhausted either. It is a balance, imperfect but sustained. You rub your hands together slowly, more out of habit now than necessity, and take a deeper breath. There is something almost rhythmic about it, this cycle of sleep and waking, of rest and awareness. It does not follow a strict pattern, but it repeats, shaped by the same conditions night after night. A less commonly discussed observation is that references to first sleep and second sleep appear in various historical texts, suggesting that people recognized and even named these distinct phases. You find that idea settling into your understanding, giving structure to what you felt without fully realizing it. You take a step closer to the hearth, again drawn once more to its steady presence. The fire has become a kind of anchor, a point around which everything else revolves. You extend your hands toward it, feeling the warmth, the now familiar sensation that marks the beginning of each day. Your body feels different now than it did when you first woke. Still not fully rested, but no longer heavy with sleep. There is a clarity in your thoughts, a steadiness in your movements. You think briefly of the night ahead, though it is still far away. You imagine returning to this same place, lying down again, entering that same pattern of rest and waking. Researchers still examine whether modern uninterrupted sleep is truly more beneficial, or if segmented sleep once offered its own advantages, allowing for periods of quiet reflection and adaptability. As you stand here, you sense that what matters most is not the structure itself, but the ability to adjust to it. You lower your hand slightly, letting the warmth settle into your skin, and take another slow breath. The morning continues to unfold around you, steady and unhurried. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of your body, the memory of the night remains not as something separate, but as part of the same continuous experience. You're awake now, but the night in its quiet, fragmented way is still with you. You find that even as the morning settles in, part of your mind lingers in the space of the night, where thoughts moved more freely, less bound by the small tasks of waking. It is a quiet overlap where memory and feeling remain soft, not yet fully shaped by the day. You recall the moments when your eyes were closed but your mind was not entirely still. The images that came were not always clear, not always logical, but they carried a certain weight, as if they belonged to something deeper than simple imagination. You remember a flicker of firelight becoming something else, something larger. A shifting shadow that felt almost like a presence. A sound that blended into a voice though no one had spoken. It is not unsettling in a sharp way. It is more like a quiet echo, something that stays with you without demanding attention. A widely acknowledged aspect of medieval life is the strong influence of religious belief and superstition on daily experience, with dreams often interpreted as meaningful, sometimes even as messages or warnings. As you reflect on what you felt during the night, you begin to understand how easily those boundaries between dream and meaning could blur. You glance toward the darker parts of the cottage again, though they are less dark now than they were before. The light has grown, pushing back some of the deeper shadows. Still they remain in places holding a softness that invites imagination. You wonder briefly how many people have woken in this same space carrying similar impressions from the nights. How many have seen something in a dream and felt it linger into the morning? There is an unusual note found in some historical writings that people would sometimes share their dreams with others, discussing them as part of daily conversation, not as something private, but as something worth understanding together. You imagine that now, voices low, exchanging thoughts about what was seen, what might it mean. You shift your weight slightly, grounding yourself again in the present. but the feeling does not entirely fade. The fire continues to burn steady and familiar. Its light is more certain now, its movement easier to follow. It offers a kind of reassurance, a contrast to the uncertainty of dreams. You take a slow breath, then another, letting your thoughts settle. Some scholars continue to explore whether medieval people experienced dreams differently, due to their environment, their beliefs, and the rhythms of their lives, or if the difference lies more in how those dreams were understood and remembered. As you stand here, it feels less like a question of difference and more like a difference in attention. You notice more. You feel more connected to the small shifts between waking and sleeping, between light and dark, between what is real and what is imagined. You glance at the others again. Their faces are calm, focused on the morning, on the small tasks that now begin to take shape. No one speaks of dreams at this moment. The day has already started to claim attention. Still, you sense that those quiet impressions remain with them too, even if unspoken. You lift your hand briefly, rubbing your face, feeling the coolness of the air against your skin, the roughness of your own touch. It brings you back, fully anchoring you in the present moment. The room feels more solid now, the light more stable, the sounds more defined. Yet there is still a softness beneath it all, a lingering quiet that comes from the night. A less commonly highlighted observation suggests that long periods of darkness, especially in the winter, may have encouraged deeper reflection and a stronger awareness of inner thought. As you consider that it feels true, the night does not simply pass, it leaves something behind. You step slightly closer to the hearth again, not out of need this time, but out of habit. The warmth is familiar now, almost expected. You extend your hands briefly, then lower them again, letting your body remain balanced between warmth and the cooler air beyond it. The shadows continue to shift through less dramatically now. The daylight grows slowly, filling in the spaces the fire cannot reach. You take another breath, steady and calm. The impressions of the night begin to fade, not suddenly, but gradually, like mist lifting from the ground. And yet something of them remains. A quiet awareness, a subtle connection between what you experienced in sleep and what you now experience awake. You stand there fully present, yet still carrying the softness of those passing dreams. And as the morning continues to unfold, you let them drift away, not lost, but gently set aside, ready to return again when the night comes back. You begin to notice a different kind of movement in the room, slower, heavier, less deliberate than the quiet steps of the people around you. It is not new, not unexpected, but it becomes clearer now as the light grows and the space reveals more of itself. A low sound reaches you first, not a voice, not quite. More like a soft exhale, steady and deep. You turn slightly, your eyes adjusting to the shifting light, and there, near the edge of the room, you see them, the animals. They are closer than you might have expected, though. Perhaps you should not be surprised. Their shapes are familiar, but their presence inside the same space where you slept feels unusual, at least at first. One shifts its weight, the movement slow and deliberate, its breath visible in the cool air just as yours had been. Another lowers its head, slightly settling again into stillness. A commonly accepted historical understanding tells us that in many rural medieval homes, livestock such as goats, sheep, or even small cattle were sometimes kept indoors during winter nights to protect them from the cold and theft and to benefit from the warmth they provided. As you stand here, you feel that reality not as a concept but as a shared space. The air carries their presence, a different scent, now stronger, more layered. It mixes with the smoke, with the earth, with everything else that defines this place. You take a slow breath, adjusting once again, letting your senses adapt. There is a quiet rhythm to their breathing, deeper and more regular than your own. It adds another layer to the sound of the room, something steady, almost grounding. You step carefully, aware now of their position of the space they occupy. It is not separate from yours. It overlaps, intersects, requires attention. A small but interesting detail noted in some accounts is that the body heat from animals could make a noticeable difference in such enclosed spaces, contributing to a slight increase in overall warmth during cold nights. You consider that now, thinking back to the night, the way the cold had felt just a little less severe than it might have been otherwise. You had not noticed it then, but now standing here it becomes clearer. You move a little closer, not too close, just enough to observe. The texture of their coats catches the light, rough in places, softer in others. Their presence is calm, unhurried, as if they belong here as much as you do. You notice how no one reacts strongly to them. No one treats them as unusual. They are simply part of the environment, part of the daily rhythm. There is a perspective among historians that close proximity between humans and animals influence not only practical aspects of life, but also perceptions of space cleanliness and comfort. As you stand here, you begin to understand how those boundaries might blur. You shift your stance again, careful not to step too close, mindful of their space as much as your own. One of the animals lifts its head slightly, its gaze moving in your direction for a brief moment. There is no alarm in it, no tension, just awareness. Then it settles again. You feel a quiet sense of balance in that exchange, a mutual recognition without interaction. The fire continues to burn behind you, its warmth now mixed with the subtle heat that comes from these living bodies sharing the space. It's not enough to transform the room, but it slightly softens it in a way that is difficult to measure. Scholars continue to explore whether this practice of keeping animals indoors significantly improves survival rates during harsh winters, or if it introduced other challenges that people simply accepted as part of necessity. As you consider the layered air, the shared space, the quiet coexistence, it feels like another example of balance rather than perfection. You take another slow breath, letting the scents, the warmth, the sounds settle into something familiar. The room feels fuller now, more alive, though not more crowded in a way that feels overwhelming. Everything has its place, even if those places overlap. You step back slightly, returning your attention to the center of the room, to the fire, to the people moving quietly through the early part of the day. Behind you, the animals remain steady and calm, their presence a constant quiet contribution to the shared effort of enduring the cold. You realize in a quiet and steady way that survival here is not an individual act. It is shared, between people, between bodies, even between species. And as you stand there breathing slowly, adjusting once more to the layered reality of this space, you accept that this too is part of the night, part of the morning, part of everything that happens within these walls. You begin to notice something else now, something quieter than sound, less visible than light, yet impossible to ignore once it reaches your awareness. It is the feeling of dampness, not in a dramatic way, but as a constant presence that settles into everything around you. You feel it first in your clothing. The fabric that had warmed slightly by the fire now carries a faint coolness beneath that warmth, as if it never fully dried, as if it holds on to the night in a way that cannot be shaken off. You press your fingers lightly against your sleeve and there is a softness there, but also a subtle heaviness. You take a slow breath and the air itself seems thicker, not just with smoke, but with moisture that lingers invisible yet persistent. A well-established point in environmental history explains that medieval homes, especially those with earthen floors and limited ventilation, often retained moisture from both the ground and the air, creating a consistently damp indoor climate during winter months. You do not need to be told this to understand it. You can feel it in every surface you touch. You shift your weight and your foot presses slightly into the ground. The earth beneath you is firm but not dry. There is a faint give to it, a quiet reminder that the cold does not freeze everything solid. Some parts remain soft, holding onto water that never quite disappears. You glance toward the walls again. The surface looks solid enough, but now you notice small variations in colour, slight darkening in certain areas where moisture has settled more deeply. It is not dripping, not obvious, but it is there. A lesser-known observation found in some studies suggests that damp living conditions contributed not only to discomfort, but also to the gradual deterioration of materials requiring constant maintenance and repair. As you look around, you can see the evidence of that ongoing effort. Patches, reinforcements, areas where the wall has been strengthened again and again. You run your hand lightly along one section, feeling the texture shift beneath your fingers. Some parts are smoother, recently worked. Others are rougher, older, worn down by time and exposure. You pull your hand back and rub your fingers together, noticing how they feel slightly cool, slightly damp, even after only a brief touch. There is a quiet persistence to this dampness. It does not demand attention. It simply remains shaping the environment in small, continuous ways. You shift your shoulders again, adjusting your clothing, trying to settle it in a way that feels more comfortable. But the sensation lingers. Warmth on the surface, coolness beneath. There is an idea discussed among scholars that prolonged exposure to damp conditions may have contributed to certain chronic discomforts affecting joint, skin, and overall well-being, even if people of the time did not describe it in those exact terms. As you stand here, you feel a subtle stiffness, not entirely from the cold, but from something deeper, something that settles into the body over time. You take another breath, slower now, letting it out gently. The fire helps, but only partially. It dries what is closest to it, warms the air nearby, but beyond that small radius, the dampness remains unchanged. You notice how people move their belongings closer to the hearth. Small adjustments to take advantage of that limited dryness. A cloth laid near the fire. A garment turned inside out to catch the heat. Each action small but purposeful. You consider doing the same, adjusting your sleeve again, holding it slightly closer to the warmth, letting the heat reach it more directly. It helps, but only briefly. Once you step back, the coolness returns. There is a quiet acceptance in this process. You do not expect to eliminate the dampness. You learn to manage it, to work around it, to live with it. You glance again at the floor, at the uneven spread of rushes. Some areas feel drier than others, perhaps replaced more recently, perhaps simply positioned where less moisture gathers. You step carefully, choosing where to stand, where to rest your weight. A subtle detail mentioned in passing by some historians is that the use of fresh rushes could temporarily improve both comfort and air quality, though the effect was short-lived. You imagine that the brief sense of renewal quickly absorbed back into the ongoing cycle. You take another slow breath, letting the sensation settle into something familiar. The dampness does not leave, but neither do you. You remain within it, adjusting, adapting, finding small ways to lessen its impact. The fire continues its steady glow. The light grows slightly stronger. The room becomes more defined, and still beneath it all, the quiet presence of moisture remains, shaping every surface, every movement, every breath. You stand there aware of it now in a way you were not before, and like everything else in this place, it becomes something you learn to carry with you. You begin to feel another quiet presence, one that has been with you since before you woke, though you did not fully notice it at first. It does not press against your skin like the cold, nor fill the air like the smoke. It sits deeper somewhere within you. Hunger. It is not sharp, not urgent in this moment, but steady. A hollow awareness that follows you as you stand, as you breathe, as you shift your weight from one foot to the other. You pause near the hearth, watching as someone reaches toward a small container, checking its contents with a careful hand. There is no abundance here, no excess. Every movement is measured, every portion considered. A widely recognized aspect of medieval winter life is that food supplies often became limited as the season progressed, especially for those with fewer resources, leading to simpler meals and reduced portions. As you stand here, you understand how that shapes the morning. Eating is not taken for granted. It is planned, observed, sometimes delayed. You swallow once, noticing how your body responds, how it anticipates something that has not yet arrived. The smell near the hearth shifts slightly as something is placed closer to the fire. It is faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the other scents in the room, but gradually it becomes clearer. Warmth carries scent differently. You take a slow breath, letting it reach you, and there is a subtle change in your awareness. It is not a rich aroma, not something that fills the space, but it is enough to draw your attention. You step a little closer, not out of urgency, but out of quiet curiosity. A small but interesting note found in some accounts is that simple foods such as coarse bread, porridge, or thin stews form the foundation of winter diets, often prepared in small quantities to stretch supplies over time. You watch now as something is stirred near the fire, the movement slow, deliberate. There is no rush. You feel the hunger more clearly now, not because it has grown, but because your attention has turned toward it. It becomes easier to notice once you acknowledge it. You shift your hands, clasping them loosely together, letting them rest near the warmth of the hearth. There is a certain patience in the way everyone waits. No one presses forward. No one reaches ahead of another. The process unfolds at its own pace, guided by necessity rather than desire. You glance around the room again. noticing how others carry the same quiet awareness. It shows in small ways, the way someone watches the fire a little more closely, the way another person adjusts their position as if preparing for what will come. There is a line of thought among historians that winter hunger was not always experienced as sudden deprivation, but often as a gradual reduction in quantity and variety shaping expectations over time. As you stand here, that feels accurate. You're not surprised by it. You simply live within it. The warmth of the fire grows slightly stronger as more fuel is added. The light steadies. The small vessel near the hearth releases a faint consistent scent now, something warm, something simple. You take another breath, letting it settle. A less commonly highlighted detail suggests that people sometimes used herbs or small additions to enhance the flavour of otherwise plain meals, adding variety where they could. You imagine that now a hint of something added not for luxury, but for a small change, a small comfort. You shift your stance again, feeling the floor beneath you still cool, still slightly damp. The contrast between that and the warmth of the fire becomes more noticeable. You bring your hands closer to the heat once more, then lower them again, steadying yourself. Scholars continue to examine how food scarcity influenced not only physical health, but also daily routines, shaping when and how people ate, worked, and rested. As you wait here, you sense how central this moment is, even in its simplicity. The morning is not fully begun until this quiet need is addressed, even if only partially. You notice how the sounds of the room have changed slightly. The fire remains steady, but there is a new rhythm now. The soft movement of stirring, the faint shift of containers, the quiet coordination of those preparing what little is available. You feel the hunger again more clearly now, but still contained, still manageable.
It does not overwhelm you.
It stays with you. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently, allowing yourself to remain present in the moment, not rushing ahead. The light continues to grow, though still dim. The room becomes more defined. The day moves forward. And you stand there, waiting, patient, aware of the quiet, steady presence within you. Hunger, like the cold, like the dampness, like the smoke, is simply another part of this place. Another rhythm to learn. Another sensation to carry, and you do without resistance, without surprise. You carry it, and you continue. You begin to notice differences that are not immediately obvious, not written into the walls or the floor, but present in quieter ways in how space is used and how people position themselves within it. You stand near the hearth again, as you have done many times already, but now your attention shifts beyond the warmth itself. You observe who stands closest, who lingers there a little longer, who steps back more quickly. It is subtle. No one announces it. No one explains it. Yet it becomes clearer the longer you watch. A broadly accepted understanding in social history is that even within modest communities, differences in status, resources, and roles influence daily life, including access to comfort, space, and materials. As you look around, you begin to sense those differences, not in grand displays, but in small, consistent patterns. One person wears a slightly thicker garment, the fabric denser, better at holding warmth. Another adjusts a covering that appears newer, less worn, its edges not yet frayed by time. These are not dramatic contrasts, but they are there. You shift your gaze toward the resting area where the straw is spread. Some sections appear more compacted than others, shaped by repeated use. Other areas seem slightly more elevated, perhaps arranged with a bit more care. You remember where you lay during the night, the uneven surface beneath you, the way you adjusted your position to find a place that felt just a little less cold. A lesser-known observation from historical records suggests that even within shared sleeping spaces there could be informal arrangements with certain individuals or family members occupying slightly more favourable positions closer to warmth or less exposed to drafts. As you consider that it begins to align with what you see, you take a slow breath, letting the realization settle. This is not a place of strict division, not in the way of grand halls or formal structures, but there are layers here, quiet distinctions that shape experience in ways that are easy to overlook. You step slightly to one side, allowing another person to move closer to the hearth. The movement is smooth, unspoken, but not entirely random. There is a rhythm to it, a pattern that repeats, shaped by familiarity, by habit, by understanding. Some historians have explored whether these subtle hierarchies were actively maintained, or simply emerged over time through daily interaction and necessity. As you stand here, it feels like something that has grown naturally, not enforced, but understood. You glance again at the clothing around you. The differences are not vast, but they are enough to be noticed once your attention is drawn to them. A thicker layer here, a better fitting piece there. You look down at your own garments, feeling their texture, their weight. They serve their purpose, but they do not exceed it. You adjust them again, pulling them closer and ensuring that they sit properly, that they offer what protection they can. The fire continues its steady burn, indifferent to these distinctions. It offers warmth to whoever stands near it, though not everyone can remain there as long. You step back again, allowing space, and feel the cold return more quickly than before. There is a quiet awareness in that moment. You take another breath, steady and calm. A less commonly discussed detail suggests that access to certain materials like higher quality wool or better preserved food could subtly influence comfort levels during winter, even within the same household. As you reflect on that, it becomes clear that survival is shared, but not always experienced equally. You glance once more at the sleeping area, at the arrangement of straw, at the slight variations in how it has been shaped and used. You think of the night again, of how you settled, how others settled, how each person found their place within the same limited space. Scholars continue to examine how these small differences impacted social relationships, whether they created tension or were simply accepted as part of the natural order. As you stand here, it feels less like conflict and more like quiet structure. No one speaks of it. No one challenges it. It simply exists. You shift your weight again, grounding yourself, letting the awareness pass without resistance. The morning continues to unfold steady and unhurried. The fire burns. The light grows. The room remains the same, and yet you see it differently now. Not just as a shared space, but as a space shaped by subtle layers, by quiet distinctions that influence how each person moves, rests, and endures. You take another slow breath, letting it settle within you. And then, as with everything else here, you accept it. Not as something to question, but as something to understand. A part of the pattern, a part of the place, a part of the life you are now moving through. You feel the change before you fully understand it. It begins as a pressure, subtle at first, a quiet insistence that seems to come from beyond the walls. The air shifts not inside the cottage, but around it, pressing inward in a way that makes the structure respond. A low sound follows. Not quite a howl, not quite a whistle. Something in between, shaped by distance, by movement, by the uneven edges of the land outside. You turn your head slightly, listening. The wind has strengthened. It no longer brushes gently against the walls. It leans into them, testing, pushing, searching for any weakness it can find. You hear it move across the thatch above a soft but constant rush, like something passing overhead without ever stopping. A well-established observation in climate and architectural history explains that winter storms in medieval Europe could place significant strain on small rural dwellings, especially those built with lightweight materials, making maintenance and repair a constant necessity. As you stand here, you feel that strain not as a distant idea, but as a living pressure around you. The walls respond in small ways. A faint creak here, a slight shift there. Nothing dramatic, nothing immediate, but enough to remind you that this structure is not immovable. It holds, but it yields, slightly adapting to the force rather than resisting it completely. You pull your garment closer again instinctively, though the cold has not yet changed inside. It is the awareness that moves you, the sense that something outside is growing stronger. A sudden gust presses harder, and the doorway covering lifts slightly before settling back into place. A thin line of light flickers, then steadies again. You take a slow breath, listening more closely now. There is a lesser-known note in some historical accounts that particularly strong winter winds could drive snow into even the smallest gaps in cottage walls or roofs, creating fine layers of frost inside the home itself. You glance toward the edges of the room, half expecting to see it though. For now there is only the usual dimness. Still, the possibility settles in your mind. You step a little closer to the center of the room, as if distance from the walls might offer some measure of security, even if only in feeling. Around you others have noticed as well. Movements become slightly more focused. A glance toward the roof, a brief check of the doorway. No one speaks loudly, but there is a shared awareness now, a quiet readiness. The fire continues to burn its presence steady, though. The shifting air causes the flames to move more actively, leaning slightly, responding to currents you cannot fully see. You watch it carefully, noticing how even this small source of warmth is affected by what happens outside. Some historians have explored whether people living in such conditions developed a heightened sensitivity to weather changes, able to anticipate storms through subtle cues in sound temperature and air movement. As you stand here, it feels plausible. You did not need to step outside to know that something had changed. You feel it. You hear it. You understand it. Another gust presses against the cottage, stronger this time. The walls hold, but the sound deepens, the creak more pronounced. It does not break. It bends, adjusts, absorbs. You shift your weight slightly, grounding yourself as if your own stillness might somehow contribute to the stability of the space. It's not rational, but it feels natural. A small curious detail mentioned in passing by some researchers is that people sometimes associated strong winter winds with unseen forces or spirits giving shape to the sounds they could not fully explain. You consider that briefly, how the mind might fill in the gaps, turning sound into presence. The wind continues steady now, less in bursts and more in a constant push. It surrounds the cottage, moving along its edges, over its roof, around its frame. Inside, the air remains mostly the same, though you can feel faint currents shifting, subtle movements that change how the warmth settles, how the smoke rises. You adjust your position again, turning slightly, aligning yourself with the new flow of air, though you cannot see it directly. Scholars continue to examine how well these structures actually performed under prolonged exposure to severe weather, with some suggesting that their flexibility allowed them to endure better than more rigid constructions. As you listen to the quiet creaking, the slight movement, you begin to understand that idea. The cottage does not resist completely, it adapts. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. The storm, or whatever this is becoming, is not inside, but is not far away either. You remain where you are, steady aware, listening to the constant presence of the wind as it moves around you. The fire burns. The walls hold, and you stand within this fragile balance, feeling the world outside press close, but not yet break through. You notice the closeness of everyone again, not just in how you stand near one another, but in how little distance truly exists between moments of life here. There are no separate rooms, no quiet divisions. Everything happens within reach, within sight, within hearing. A soft voice rises near you, low and careful. You turn slightly, not out of curiosity alone, but because the tone carries something different. Not urgency, not alarm, but a kind of focus that draws attention. Someone has settled near the straw, their posture lower, their movements slower than before. Others gather close, not crowding, but present, attentive. The space shifts around them, forming a loose circle that feels both protective and expectant. You remain where you are for a moment, observing. There is a widely recognized understanding in social history that in small medieval homes, major life events such as birth, illness, and even death often took place within the same shared space where daily life unfolded. There were no separate chambers for such moments. They happened here in the center of everything. You step a little closer, careful, respectful of the space that has formed. The air feels different now, not colder, not warmer, but focused. Conversations quiet further. Movements become more deliberate. You notice how someone brings a piece of cloth, another, adjusts the position of the straw, creating a slightly more stable surface. These actions are small, but they carry meaning. A lesser known detail, sometimes mentioned in historical discussions, is that women within the household or community often took on the role of guiding childbirth, relying on shared knowledge passed through generations rather than formal medical training. You see that now in the way one person moves with quiet confidence, their actions practice, their presence steady. You do not need to understand every detail to feel the weight of the moment. You stand at a slight distance, aware that this is both a private and a shared experience, something that belongs to those closest yet unfolds within the same space that holds everything else. The fire continues to burn nearby, its warmth steady, its light flickering across the scene. It does not change its rhythm, but it seems to frame the moment to hold it in a soft, shifting glow. You take a slow breath, then another, letting the quiet settle into you. Some historians have explored how the lack of physical separation in such homes influenced emotional experiences, making events like childbirth deeply communal, with little distinction between private and public life. As you stand here, that idea feels immediate. There is no stepping away from this. It happens within the same walls, the same air, the same shared awareness. A soft sound rises again, more distinct now, followed by murmured words, low and reassuring. The tone carries calm, though beneath it you sense effort, focus, concentration. You shift your weight slightly, grounding yourself, unsure whether to move closer or remain where you are. You choose to stay. A small curious detail noted in some historical accounts is that certain rituals or spoken phrases were sometimes used during childbirth, intended to offer protection or encouragement, blending practical knowledge with belief. You listen carefully, wondering if what you hear carries such meaning, though the words are too soft to fully catch. The moment stretches not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, continuous flow. Time feels different here, measured not in minutes, but in breaths, in movements and quiet exchanges. You glance briefly toward the doorway, then back again. The outside world feels distant in this moment, even though it presses so close to the walls. Inside, everything narrows to this. Scholars continue to examine how these intimate shared experiences shaped family bonds and community connections, whether they strengthened them through closeness or created strains through constant exposure. As you watch, you sense the closeness more than anything else. The way people remain an attentive present. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. The fire shifts, the light flickers, the room remains the same, yet the atmosphere has changed. You realize that in a place like this, life does not separate itself into distinct spaces or times. It flows through the same environment, carried by the same people, witnessed by all who are present. You stand quietly part of that shared space, aware of the moment without needing to define it fully. And as the quiet voices continue, as the small movements unfold, you understand that this too is part of the night, part of the day, part of everything that happens within these walls. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is far away. Everything is close. You feel the warmth of the hearth again, but this time it carries something different with it. Not just comfort, not just relief from the cold, but a quiet awareness of how easily that same warmth could change. You watch the fire more closely now. The flames move steadily, rising and falling, consuming the wood with calm persistence. They seem controlled, contained within the shallow boundaries of the hearth. Yet there is something about their movement that reminds you they are never fully still, never entirely predictable. A widely accepted observation in historical studies is that fire was both essential and dangerous in medieval homes where open hearth, thatched roofs, and wooden structures created a constant risk of accidental fires spreading quickly. As you stand here, the idea does not feel distant. It feels immediate. You take a small step back, not out of fear, but out of awareness. A spark lifts briefly from the fire, carried upward by a small current of air glowing for a moment before fading into nothing. You follow it with your eyes, imagining what might happen if it did not fade. The thought lingers. You glance upwards toward the thatched roof, thick and dry in places darkened by smoke, but still capable of catching if given the chance. It feels both protective and vulnerable at the same time. A subtle but intriguing detail noted in some records is that households often took small precautions, such as keeping water or earth nearby ready to smother flames if needed, though these measures were not always sufficient. You look around briefly, wondering where such things might be kept, though nothing stands out immediately. The fire crackles again, louder this time, a piece of wood shifting as it burns through. The sound is sharper, drawing your attention back. You step slightly closer, once more extending your hands toward the warmth, though now with a heightened sense of care. You're aware of how near you are, of how easily closeness can become risk. There is a perspective among historians that people living with open fires developed an intuitive understanding of their behavior, recognizing subtle signs of change that might indicate danger. As you watch the flames now, you begin to see those small variations. The way they lean when the air shifts, the way they flare briefly when new fuel is added. You adjust your position again, maintaining a balance between warmth and distance. Around you, others move with similar awareness. No one leans too close, no one turns their back entirely. The fire is trusted but never ignored. You take a slow breath, letting the warmth reach your hands, your face, then step back slightly again, allowing the heat to settle without overwhelming. A lesser-known note suggests that in some cases communities would come together to help rebuild homes lost to fire, recognizing the shared risk that such accidents posed. You consider that briefly the fragility of these structures, the effort required to create them, and how quickly that effort could be undone. The thought is not frightening in a sharp way. It is steady, real. You glance again at the walls, at the wooden beams, at the layers of material that make up this shelter. Serves its purpose, yet each part carries its own vulnerability. The fire continues its quiet work unchanged by your thoughts. It offers warmth. It offers light. It also demands respect. Scholars continue to examine how people balance these opposing realities, relying on fire for survival while living with the constant possibility of loss. As you stand here, you understand that balance not as a theory, but as a daily experience. You shift your weight once more, grounding yourself in the present moment. The warmth reaches you again, steady, familiar. The flames move contained but alive. You extend your hands briefly, then lower them, maintaining that careful distance. There is a quiet agreement in the room, unspoken but shared. The fire will be tended. It will be watched. It will be respected, because it must be. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. The cold remains beyond the walls. The fire remains within. And between the two, you stand aware of both holding yourself in that narrow space where warmth and risk meet. You notice how the mood of the room shifts again gently, almost imperceptibly, as the first urgency of waking gives way to something quieter, more reflective. The fire continues to glow, the light steady now, and for a moment there is a pause in movement. Someone near the hearth lowers their head slightly, their hands coming together in a familiar gesture. The motion is small, but it draws attention not through sound, but through stillness. You watch as others follow, not all at once, not in perfect unison, but gradually. A lowering of voices, a softening of posture, a quiet gathering of thought. A well-attested feature of medieval daily life is the presence of religious practice woven into ordinary routines, with prayers often marking the beginning and end of the day, as well as moments of uncertainty or need. As you stand there, you feel how naturally this moment fits into the rhythm of the morning. You hesitate for just a second, then mirror the gesture, lowering your head slightly, letting your hands rest together, not perfectly, but join the quieter. The room does not become silent, not completely. The fire still crackles softly, though the wind still moves faintly against the walls. But the human sounds fade, replaced by something more inward. You do not need to understand every word spoken in low voices around you. The tone carries enough. It is steady, calm, focused. A small but fascinating detail sometimes noted in historical writings is that certain prayers or protective phrases were believed to guard against unseen dangers, especially during harsh seasons when survival felt more uncertain. You consider that briefly, how belief might offer a kind of warmth of its own. You take a slow breath, letting your thoughts settle. There is a perspective among historians that religious rituals provided not only spiritual comfort, but also a sense of structure and predictability in environments where so much remained uncertain. As you stand here, that feels clear. The moment creates a pause, a point of stillness in the flow of the day. You close your eyes briefly, not out of obligation, but because it feels natural. The dim light fades further behind your eyelids, replaced by a softer darkness, one that feels less heavy than the night, more controlled. You listen. The murmured voices blend together, rising and falling gently. No single voice dominates. It is a shared expression, a collective moment. You feel your shoulders ease slightly, your breathing slow, your awareness shift inward. A lesser, discussed observation suggests that these quiet rituals may have helped regulate emotional responses to stress, offering a moment of calm that supported resilience during difficult conditions. As you stand here, you sense that effect. The cold has not changed. The hunger remains, the dampness lingers, but for this moment they feel less immediate. You open your eyes again slowly. The fire greets you first, its light steady, its warmth unchanged. The room returns not suddenly but gently, as if it had been waiting. Around you others begin to lift their heads, their movements unhurried. The moment of stillness dissolves, but it does not disappear completely. It leaves something behind, a quiet steadiness that carries forward. You lower your hands, letting them rest at your sides again. The morning resumes. The small sounds return, the shifting of feet, the movement of clothing, the quiet preparation for what comes next. Scholars continue to explore how deeply belief shaped daily endurance, whether it served primarily as comfort explanation or a framework for understanding hardship. As you reflect on the moment just past, it feels like all of these at once. You take another slow breath, feeling the air move in and out, steady, familiar. The room feels slightly different now, though nothing has physically changed. The same walls, the same fire, the same cold beyond them. And yet there is a softness in the atmosphere, a calm that lingers just beneath the surface. You step slightly closer to the hearth again, returning to its warmth, to its steady presence. The ritual has ended, but its effect remains. You carry it with you quietly as the day continues to unfold. You begin to notice how the tone of the room softens again, not into silence this time, but into something quieter, more familiar. The urgency of waking has passed, the stillness of prayer has settled, and now there is space for something in between. A voice rises low and unhurried, speaking not out of necessity, but simply to fill the quiet. It is not loud enough to command attention, yet it draws you in all the same. You turn slightly, listening. The words are simple, spoken with a calm rhythm, not rushed, not overly expressive. They seem to carry a memory, something retold rather than newly formed. You recognize it as a story, or perhaps just the beginning of one. A commonly acknowledged aspect of life in close-knit medieval communities is the role of oral storytelling, where experiences, local knowledge and traditions were passed from person to person through spoken word, especially during quiet moments indoors. As you stand here, you feel how naturally that fits into this space. The fire crackles softly in the background, its sound blending with the voice, creating a steady rhythm that supports the flow of words. You shift your stance, slightly settling into a position where you can both feel the warmth and listen without distraction. Others do the same, not all at once, but gradually. A slight turn of the head, a pause in movement, a quiet attention that spreads through the room. The story itself is not dramatic, not filled with sudden turns. It unfolds slowly, describing something familiar, perhaps a memory of a previous winter or a moment that carries meaning in a quiet way. There is a small, curious note found in some historical accounts that storytelling often served not only as entertainment but also as a way to pass time during long dark seasons, helping to ease the mental weight of confinement and cold. As you listen, you begin to understand that purpose. You are not waiting for a conclusion. You are simply present for the telling. You notice how the voice moves, how it rises slightly at certain moments, then falls again, maintaining a steady pace that feels almost soothing. The fire responds in its own way, a soft crackle here, a gentle shift there, never interrupting, only accompanying. You take a slow breath, letting the sound settle around you. There is a perspective among historians that these shared moments of quiet storytelling may have strengthened social bonds, creating a sense of connection that extended beyond practical cooperation. As you stand here, you feel that connection, subtle but real. No one speaks over the voice. No one rushes it. It is given space. You glance briefly at the others, noticing how their attention rests gently on the speaker, not fixed, not intense, but present. You feel your own thoughts slow slightly, aligning with the rhythm of the words, the steady cadence that does not demand but invites. A lesser-known detail suggests that certain stories were repeated across generations with only small changes, preserving memory while allowing for personal interpretation. You wonder if what you are hearing now has been told many times before, shaped by different voices, carried through different winters. You do not need to know. The effect is the same. You shift your hands slightly, bringing them closer to the fire again, though more out of habit now than necessity. The warmth is familiar, steady, no longer something you must constantly seek. The story continues. You notice how it weaves into the sounds of the room, how it becomes part of the environment rather than something separate from it. Outside, the wind still moves, though it feels more distant now, softened by the focus within the cottage. Inside, the voice carries calm and unbroken. Scholars continue to explore how oral traditions shape not only memory, but also identity, influencing how people understood their place in the world and within their community. As you listen, you sense that influence not as something defined, but as something felt. You take another slow breath, letting the moment settle. The story does not need to end. It exists as part of the morning, just as the fire, the cold, and the shared space to you. You remain there listening, your awareness gently held by the rhythm of the voice. And for a brief time, the cold feels a little less sharp, the space a little more complete. Not because anything has changed, but because you're part of something being shared. Something quiet. Something steady. Something that carries you softly through the morning. You begin to notice something that has been present all along, woven quietly into the air, into the surfaces, into the shared space you now move within. It is not a single scent, not something easily named, but a layering of many small things that settle together. You draw a slow breath, more aware now. The smoke is still there, steady and familiar. Beneath it, the earth damp and constant. And then something else. The faint trace of unwashed fabric of bodies that have moved, worked, rested, all within the same limited space. It is not overwhelming. It is simply there. A well-established observation in social and environmental history is that regular bathing and laundering were less frequent in many medieval communities, especially during winter, due to limited access to heated water and the risk of exposure to cold. As you stand here, that reality becomes part of your awareness, not as discomfort alone, but as an element of daily life. You shift your clothing slightly, adjusting the layers against your skin. The fabric feels worn, familiar, carrying its own scent shaped by repeated use. You rub your hands together briefly, then pause, noticing how your skin feels. Slightly dry in places, slightly rough, not painful, but changed by the environment. A small curious detail sometimes mentioned in historical discussions is that strong scents, including herbs or natural oils, were occasionally used to mask or soften less pleasant odours, though such practices were not always widespread or consistent. You glance around, wondering if any trace of that exists here, though if it does, it blends seamlessly into everything else. You take another breath, slower this time, letting the air settle within you without resistance. Around you, no one reacts to it. There is no sign of discomfort, no acknowledgement. It is part of the shared experience, something so constant that it no longer draws attention. There is a perspective among historians that sensory adaptation played a significant role in how people experience their environment, with repeated exposure reducing sensitivity to conditions that might otherwise feel overwhelming. As you stand here, you begin to feel that shift within yourself. What was noticeable at first becomes less so. What seemed distinct begins to blend. You step slightly closer to the hearth again, where the warmth carries the scents differently, softening, some strengthening others. The air moves gently here, shaped by the rising heat. You notice how it changes your perception, how the same space can feel slightly different depending on where you stand. A less frequently discussed observation suggests that shared living conditions may have influenced social tolerance, with individuals becoming accustomed not only to physical proximity, but also to the sensory presence of others. As you look around, that idea feels clear. There is no separation, no distance. Everything is shared. You adjust your sleeve again, pressing it lightly between your fingers, feeling its texture, its weight. You think briefly of water, of what it might feel like to wash, to remove the layers that have built up over time. But the thought remains distant, shaped more by memory than by immediate possibility. The cold outsider does not allow for such comforts easily. Scholars continue to examine how hygiene practices varied across regions and social groups, and how those practices affected health and daily experience. As you stand here, you realize that what matters most in this moment is not cleanliness in the way you might define it, but balance. Warmth over water, shelter over exposure, survival over comfort. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. The air remains the same. You remain within it, and gradually, without effort, without decision, you adjust. The scents blend, the sensations soften. The awareness remains, but it no longer demands your attention. You stand there, part of the same shared space, breathing the same air, moving within the same conditions as everyone else. And what once stood out begins to settle into the background. Not gone, but accepted. A quiet part of everything around you. You begin to notice the small moments more clearly now, the ones that might have slipped past you earlier, hidden beneath the sharper edges of cold hunger and discomfort. They are not dramatic. They do not change the conditions around you. But they exist quietly, offering something lighter. You shift slightly closer to the hearth again, though not fully into its warmth, just enough to feel its presence without needing it completely. Your body has adjusted, found a rhythm within the cold, and now you're able to notice what lies beyond it. Someone beside you exhales softly, a long, slow breath that carries a faint sense of ease. You hear it, and for a moment you mirror it without thinking, letting your own breath follow the same pace. It changes something subtly. A well-documented aspect of human behavior noted even in historical contexts is the ability to find comfort in repetition and shared routines, especially in challenging environments. As you stand here, you feel how those routines shape the space, not by removing hardship, but by making it more familiar. You glance toward the fire again. Its light is steady now, no longer demanding attention, simply existing as a constant presence. You extend your hands briefly, then lower them again, letting the warmth touch you, without fully claiming your focus. A faint smile passes across someone's face nearby, small and brief, almost unnoticed. You see it out of the corner of your eye, and it lingers just long enough to register. There is a subtle detail sometimes mentioned in studies of daily life that moments of quiet contentment, even in difficult conditions, often came from simple interactions, shared glances, or the brief easing of tension rather than from any material change. You understand that now, in the smallest shift of expression, in the softening of posture. You adjust your stance again, feeling the ground beneath you still uneven, still cool, but no longer as distracting as it once was. There is a sense of familiarity that has settled in. The room has not changed, but your experience of it has. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently, and notice how your shoulders relax slightly, how your movements feel less guarded. There is a perspective among historians that people living in persistent hardship developed ways of finding stability in the predictable aspects of daily life, creating moments of quiet reassurance within otherwise difficult conditions. As you stand here, that idea feels present. You notice the rhythm of the fire, the steady movement of others, the soft layering of sound and light. It forms something consistent, something you can rely on. A less commonly highlighted observation suggests that even small sensory comforts, such as the feeling of warmth on the skin or the sound of familiar voices, could have a significant impact on emotional well-being. You feel that now in the gentle warmth that brushes your hands, in the low murmur of voices around you. You glance again at the others, noticing how they move with more ease now, how the stiffness of waking has faded, replaced by a quiet readiness. No one rushes, no one lingers unnecessarily. Everything flows at a steady, manageable pace. Scholars continue to explore how resilience was built not only through endurance, but through these small repeated experiences of balance where discomfort was met with moments of relief, however brief. As you stand here, you sense that balance. It is not dramatic. It does not stand out, but it is there. You shift your hands, again clasping them loosely, then releasing them, feeling the movement, the control, the presence of your own body within this space. You take another slow breath. The air remains the same. The cold remains beyond the walls. And yet within this moment there is something lighter. Not warmth in the physical sense, but a kind of ease. A brief pause where nothing presses too strongly. You allow yourself to remain there for a moment longer, not seeking anything more, not needing anything to change. The fire continues. The light holds steady, and you stand within it, aware of the quiet comfort that exists alongside everything else. A small thing, but enough. You begin to hear the cottage itself, Not just the wind pressing against it from outside, not just the voices and movements within, but the structure, the materials, the quiet reactions of wood and earth to the cold that surrounds them. It starts as a faint sound almost too soft to notice. A small sharp tick from somewhere above you. Then another slightly different in tone somewhere along the wall. You pause listening. The fire continues to crackle behind you, steady and familiar. But these sounds are separate. They come from the frame of the cottage itself, from the beams, from the walls, from the parts you do not usually think about. A widely recognized observation in studies of traditional buildings is that wooden structures often respond audibly to temperature changes, expanding and contracting as conditions shift, producing small creaks, cracks, and settling sounds. As you stand here, you hear that process unfolding around you. Another sound follows, longer this time. A low, slow creak that seems to travel along the roof, then fade. You tilt your head slightly, trying to follow it, trying to understand its path. It is not alarming, but it is noticeable. A subtle detail sometimes mentioned in environmental accounts is that extreme cold can make materials more brittle, increasing the likelihood of these small, sudden sounds as tension is released within the structure. You consider that now the way the cold outside presses inward, the way the materials respond in their own quiet language. You shift your weight slightly, your feet pressing into the uneven ground, and for a moment the sounds seem to pause. Then they resume. A faint crack, a soft settling, a low, almost imperceptible movement that you feel as much as hear. There is a perspective among historians that people living in such environments became attuned to these structural sounds, able to distinguish between normal settling and signs of potential danger. As you listen now, you begin to understand how that awareness might develop. Not every sound carries the same meaning. Some are part of the rhythm. Some require attention. You take a slow breath, letting your awareness settle, focusing on the pattern rather than each individual noise. The wind outside shifts again, and with it the sounds inside change slightly. The direction of pressure alters the way the walls respond, adjusts. You can hear it. You can feel it. A less commonly discussed observation suggests that the interaction between wind temperature and structure created a constantly changing acoustic environment inside these homes, one that required continuous interpretation by those who lived within it. As you stand here, that idea becomes clear. This is not a silent space. It is a listening space. You glance upward again, your eyes tracing the darkened beams, the lines of the roof, the places where the thatch meets the frame. Everything holds. Everything moves just slightly. Scholars continue to examine how these sensory experiences shaped people's relationship with their environment, whether they fostered a deeper connection or a constant low level of vigilance. As you stand here, it feels like both. You are aware, but not uneasy. You shift your hands again, bringing them briefly toward the warmth of the fire, then lowering them, maintaining that balance you have learned. The sounds continue, but they no longer stand out as sharply. They blend. They become part of the background, part of the steady presence of the cottage itself. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. The structure holds. The fire burns. The wind moves beyond the walls, and within it all you stand listening. Not just to what surrounds you, but to the quiet conversation between materials, temperature, and time. A conversation that never stops, only changes. You begin to feel the pull of the next part of the day, not as a sudden demand, but as a quiet shift in energy around you. The stillness that followed waking has passed, and now there is a gentle sense of preparation of movement that will soon carry you beyond these walls. You notice it in small ways. Someone adjusts their clothing more firmly, pulling layers into place with purpose rather than habit. Another checks a simple tool resting near the wall, lifting it briefly, then setting it down again as if confirming it is ready. You take a slow breath, aware that the warmth you have gathered will not stay with you once you step outside. A commonly accepted understanding of rural medieval life is that daily work often began early, especially in winter when daylight hours were limited, making the most of available light essential for completing necessary tasks. As you stand here, you feel that quiet urgency, not rushed but present. You shift your feet slightly, testing your balance, feeling the ground beneath you once more. The stiffness from the night has eased, but not entirely. Your body carries the memory of the cold, the uneven rest, the dampness. You roll your shoulders, gently loosening them, preparing without fully thinking about it. There is a faint movement near the doorway as someone approaches it. The covering lifts slightly, allowing a thin line of brighter light to enter sharper than before, carrying with it a hint of the outside air. You feel it immediately. Colder. Cleaner in a way, but less forgiving. A small but interesting detail noted in some accounts is that stepping outside after a night in a smoke-filled interior could create a brief sensation of clarity as the lungs adjusted to fresher air, even if the temperature itself was harsher. You imagine that now the contrast between inside and outside, between contained warmth and open cold. You take another breath slower this time, as if preparing for that transition. Around you others continue their quiet preparations. Movements are still calm but more directed now. The pause of the morning is ending. There is a perspective among historians that daily routines in such environments were shaped as much by necessity as by habit, with each action aligned to the demands of survival rather than personal preference. As you stand here, that feels evident. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is unnecessary. You adjust your clothing again, pulling it tighter, ensuring it sits as securely as possible. You tuck in small gaps, close openings where the cold might enter more easily. A less commonly discussed observation suggests that repeated exposure to harsh outdoor conditions made these moments of preparation especially important, as even small adjustments could make a noticeable difference once outside. You take that into account, now moving carefully, deliberately. You glance once more at the hearth. The fire continues to burn steady, reliable, though you know you will soon leave it behind. The warmth it offers feels more valuable now, precisely because it is temporary. You extend your hands one last time, feeling the heat against your skin, letting it settle as deeply as it can before you move away. Scholars continue to examine how people balanced indoor and outdoor life during winter, transitioning between two very different environments multiple times each day. As you stand here, you sense that contrast clearly. Inside, controlled, limited, shared. Outside, open, cold, unpredictable. You take a slow breath, then release it gently. The doorway shifts again as someone passes through the light, widening briefly before narrowing once more. The sound of the outside becomes clearer for a moment, then fades again as the covering falls back into place. You feel a quiet readiness building within you. Not eagerness, not reluctance, just acceptance. You step slightly toward the center of the room, adjusting your stance, preparing to follow. The morning has fully arrived now, even if the light remains soft and the air remains cold. You take one last look around the cottage. The walls, the hearth, the shared space that has carried you through the night. And then you turn your attention toward the doorway, toward the cold that waits beyond it. You take another steady breath and prepare to step into the day. You step closer to the doorway, not crossing it yet, but feeling its presence more fully now. The air near it is different. Colder, sharper, carrying a faint brightness that does not exist deeper inside the cottage. You pause there for a moment, letting your senses adjust. The light that enters is still pale, filtered by cloud and winter sky, but it is stronger than what you have known inside. It stretches across the floor in a thin band, touching the uneven ground, catching on the edges of objects, revealing details that were hidden in the softer glow of the fire. You glance down, watching how that light moves as the doorway covering shifts slightly with the wind. It flickers not like firelight, but in a steadier, more distant way. A widely accepted point in historical studies notes that winter days in northern regions could be short and dim with limited daylight, shaping how people structured their activities, often compressing essential tasks into narrow windows of usable light. As you stand here, you feel that constraint not as pressure, but as a quiet boundary. You take a slow breath, letting the colder air brush against your face. It wakes something in you, not fully, not suddenly, but enough to remind you that the world beyond these walls is waiting unhinged, unaffected by the warmth you have gathered inside. You shift your weight slightly, feeling the difference between standing near the hearth and standing near the threshold. The warmth fades quickly here, replaced by a sharper clarity. A subtle but intriguing detail sometimes mentioned in historical accounts is that People often became highly attuned to seasonal light patterns, using the angle and quality of daylight as a guide for timekeeping in the absence of precise clocks. You glance outward again, though you cannot yet see far, only the brightness that suggests the day has begun. You imagine the sky beyond pale and stretch, the sun low, offering light without much heat. You pull your garment closer again, instinctively preparing for what lies ahead. Behind you, the cottage continues its quiet rhythm. The fire burns, the voices remain low. The shared space holds its steady presence. In front of you, the outside calls in a different way. There is a line of thought among historians that winter was not simply a season to endure, but a cycle that shaped the pace of life, teaching patience, resilience, and careful use of resources. As you stand here, that idea feels present, not as a concept, but as something you're stepping into. You glance down again at your hands, at the way the light touches them differently. Now cooler, less forgiving. You flex your fingers once, feeling the readiness in them, the slight tension that remains from the cold. A lesser-known observation suggests that even brief exposure to winter air could sharpen awareness, making transitions between indoor and outdoor environments more noticeable than in milder seasons. You feel that now in the way your senses seem more alert, more focused. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently. The doorway shifts again, and this time you do not hesitate. You step forward. The cold meets you immediately, Lee. Not gradually, but fully. It wraps around you, pressing against your clothing, finding every place where warmth is not fully held. You inhale, and the air feels different in your chest, clearer, sharper, almost biting. You pause just outside, letting your body adjust. Behind you, the warmth of the cottage lingers, but already it feels distant, separated by only a thin barrier, yet belonging to a different space entirely. Scholars continue to explore how these daily transitions between interior and exterior environments shaped physical endurance, particularly during extended winters. As you stand here, you understand that this is not a single adjustment. It is repeated, day after day. You look ahead, though. The details remain soft, the light still low, the landscape not yet fully revealed. You take another breath, steadying yourself. The cold is constant, the light is limited. The day is short, but it has begun, and you move forward into it, carrying with you what warmth you can, knowing it will fade, knowing you will return again when the light fades once more. You stand just outside the doorway, the cold settling around you with quiet certainty. And for a moment you do nothing but breathe. The air feels sharper here, cleaner in a way, though far less forgiving than what you left behind. Your breath rises in pale clouds, drifting upward and fading quickly into the still morning. You watch it without thinking, noticing how each exhale becomes visible, then disappears. The ground beneath your feet is firmer here, touched by frost. It holds a different kind of cold one that does not sink slowly inward like the damp earth inside, but sits on the surface crisp and unyielding. You shift your weight, testing it, adjusting your balance. A widely recognized feature of rural winter life in the medieval period is the reliance on community support, especially during harsh conditions when resources were scarce, and survival often depended on cooperation between households. As you look ahead, you begin to sense that connection even before you see it clearly. There are shapes in the distance, faint at first, then gradually more defined. Other cottages, similar in form, scattered across the landscape, each holding its own small circle of warmth, its own shared life. You take a slow step forward, then another, letting your body adjust to the open space. The wind is different out here. It moves more freely, less contained, brushing against your clothing, finding its way through the layers you so carefully arranged. You pull your garment closer again instinctively, though you know it will only do so much. A small but interesting detail noted in some historical accounts is that neighbours often relied on one another during winter, sharing resources such as firewood, food, or labour, when conditions became especially difficult. You imagine that now the quiet exchange of what little can be spared, the understanding that survival is not always individual. You glance back briefly at the cottage behind you. From the outside it looks smaller than it felt within. The walls, the roof, the doorway, all simple, all unassuming. Yet you know what it holds. Warmth, smoke, life. You turn forward again. There is a figure moving in the distance, slow, deliberate, crossing from one place to another. The motion is steady, unhurried, shaped by the same conditions you now feel. You take another breath, letting the cold air fill your lungs sharper than before, but clearer as well. There is a perspective among historians that winter landscapes, though harsh, offered a kind of clarity, stripping away excess and leaving only what was necessary both in the environment and in daily life. As you stand here, that idea feels present. The land is quiet. The colours are muted. The movement is minimal. Everything feels reduced to its essentials. You step forward again, your feet finding a rhythm on the firm ground. Each step is deliberate, not rushed, shaped by the need to conserve energy to maintain balance. A less commonly discussed observation suggests that winter travel between nearby homes was often limited, but important, maintaining social ties and ensuring that no household became entirely isolated. You begin to understand that now, as you move through the open space, aware of the distance between dwellings, aware of the effort required to cross it. You glance again toward the distant shapes, noticing how they sit within the landscape, connected not by roads as you might know them, but by paths worn through repeated use. You follow one of those paths now, faint but visible, its surface slightly more compacted than the surrounding ground. Scholars continue to examine how these informal networks of movement shaped community structure, influencing how people interacted, shared resources, and supported one another during difficult seasons. As you walk, you feel that network beneath your feet not as something designed, but as something formed over time. The wind shifts slightly, brushing against your face, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from another hearth, distant but recognizable. You pause for a moment, taking it in. It reminds you that you are not alone here, that each of those distant shapes holds a life similar to your own. You take another step, then another, moving steadily forward. The cold remains. The light remains soft. The landscape stretches quietly around you, and within it you move part of a larger pattern connected by paths, by necessity, by the shared effort of enduring the season. You continue along the narrow path, your steps steady, your breath rising and fading in the cold air. The landscape remains quiet but not empty. There is a presence here, something carried not in sound or movement but in the stories that linger beneath the surface of the land. You feel it as you walk. The trees at the edge of the open space stand still, their branches bare, reaching upward in thin, intricate lines. The ground beneath them is darker, less touched by light, holding vistas that do not fully lift even as the day grows. You slow your pace slightly, not out of caution, but because your attention has shifted inward again. There is a long-standing tradition in many historical communities of explaining the uncertainties of winter, through stories giving shape to the unseen forces that seem to move through the cold, the darkness, and the quiet. As you walk here, you begin to understand how those stories might have taken form. The wind moves through the branches, producing a soft, uneven sound. It is not constant. It rises, then fades, then returns again, never quite repeating itself in the same way. You listen. For a moment, it almost feels like a voice, not clear, not distinct, but suggestive. A small but intriguing detail found in various folklore traditions is that winter nights were often associated with spirits or unseen beings believed to travel more freely in the long hours of darkness. You think back to the night you just passed, to the shadows, to the sounds that seem to exist just beyond understanding. You take a slow breath, letting it out gently. The thought does not unsettle you. It simply settles alongside everything else. You step forward again, your feet pressing into the path, leaving faint impressions that will likely fade as the day continues. There is a perspective among historians that folklore served as a way to interpret and manage the unknown, offering explanations for natural phenomena that could not easily be understood. As you move through this quiet space, that idea feels present. The wind is not just wind. The darkness is not just absence of light. They become something more shaped by imagination, by belief, by the need to understand what cannot be controlled. You glance again toward the trees, toward the deeper shadows that remain even now. They do not move, they do not change, and yet they hold your attention. A less commonly discussed observation suggests that the sensory limitations of winter-reduced light, muted sound, slower movement may have heightened the role of imagination in daily experience. As you walk, you feel that shift. The world feels quieter. And in that quiet, the mind fills the space. You take another step, then another, maintaining your steady rhythm. The path continues, guiding you forward, though not with clear edges, only with familiarity, with repetition. You look ahead again toward the distant cottages, their shapes slightly clearer now, their presence grounding. Behind you, the cottage you left is already less distinct, blending into the landscape, becoming part of the same quiet pattern. Scholars continue to explore how these stories and beliefs influenced behavior, whether they encouraged caution-shaped rituals or simply provided comfort during uncertain times. As you walk, you sense that they do all of these at once. They do not replace reality. They exist alongside it. You take a slow breath, feeling the cold air fill your lungs, then release it. The wind moves again, brushing past you, carrying that same soft, shifting sound. You listen once more, then let it pass. The path beneath your feet remains steady. The land stretches quietly around you. And within it you carry not only the physical experience of this place, but also the stories that give it shape, that fill its quiet spaces with meaning. You continue forward, steady aware part of both the seen and the imagined. You begin to feel the weight of the cold, not just on your skin, but deeper now, settled into your body in a way that is harder to ignore. Each step remains steady, but there is a growing awareness beneath it, a quiet fatigue that builds without announcing itself. It is not sudden. It does not arrive all at once. It gathers. You move forward along the path, your breath visible, your body maintaining its rhythm, yet something within you feels slower, more deliberate. The cold has worked its way inward past the surface, into your muscles, into your joints. You roll your shoulders slightly as you walk, easing a stiffness that has returned, subtle but persistent. A firmly grounded understanding in historical and medical research highlights that prolonged exposure to cold, especially without sufficient nutrition or insulation, could lead to chronic fatigue and reduced physical efficiency, even if not immediately dangerous. As you walk, you recognize that strain not as something overwhelming, but as something constant. You take a deeper breath, then another, feeling how the air moves through you sharper than before, requiring more effort to settle. Your hands shift slightly at your sides, fingers flexing, maintaining circulation, maintaining control. There is a small, lesser-known detail sometimes mentioned in studies of daily life, that people developed habitual movements, small repetitive actions to counteract the effects of cold, such as flexing fingers or shifting weight frequently. You notice yourself doing exactly that without conscious decision. You adjust your pace slightly, not faster, not slower, but more intentional. The path remains beneath you, steady guiding your steps. The landscape around you doesn't change quickly. It holds its quiet, its muted tones, its stillness. Yet your experience within it continues to shift. There is a perspective among historians that endurance in such environments was less about strength in a single moment and more about the ability to sustain effort over long periods, adapting to conditions rather than resisting them. As you continue forward, that idea feels immediate. You're not fighting the cold, you're moving within it. You take another breath, letting it out slowly, feeling the slight heaviness in your chest, the effort behind each inhale. A subtle observation from some researchers suggests that winter conditions may have influenced posture and movement, encouraging more compact, energy-conserving motions to reduce heat loss. You notice that now, in yourself, in the way your shoulders draw inward slightly, in the way your steps remain close and measured. You glance briefly at your hands, again noticing the colour, the slight stiffness that remains despite movement. You flex them once more, then let them rest. Scholars continue to examine how repeated exposure to such conditions shaped long-term physical resilience, whether it strengthened the body over time or gradually wore it down. As you walk, you sense that it may do both. You remain capable, but not unchanged. You take another step, then another, maintaining your rhythm, allowing your body to find its balance within the strain. The wind brushes past you again, steady, unchanged, as if it does not notice your effort at all. The ground remains firm beneath your feet. The path continues. You do not stop. You do not rush. You simply move. The fatigue does not disappear, but it does not stop you either. It becomes part of the motion, part of the experience, part of the quiet endurance that carries you forward. You take another slow breath, letting it out gently, and you continue. You notice the change in the light before anything else. It is still faint, still filtered through the pale sky, but there is something different in it now. A slight extension, a quiet persistence that was not there before. It lingers a little longer on the ground, stretches a little farther across the path ahead of you. You slow your pace not because you must, but because your attention has shifted again. You lift your gaze slightly, looking toward the horizon. Though it remains soft, the details blurred by distance and the low angle of the sun, the day feels a little less fragile. A commonly accepted understanding in historical and environmental studies is that even small increases in daylight during late winter would have been noticeable to those living closely tied to natural cycles, offering subtle signs that the harshest period of the season might eventually pass. As you stand here, you feel that shift not as warmth, but as duration. The light stays just a little longer. You take a slow breath, letting it settle within you. The cold has not changed. The air still carries the same sharpness, the same quiet weight. But the light introduces something else. Not comfort, not relief, but a sense of movement of time continuing forward. You glance down at the ground again, noticing how the frost catches the light differently now, reflecting it in small scattered points that were less visible earlier. It is a subtle change, but it is there. A small but intriguing detail sometimes mentioned in seasonal studies is that people often marked the passing of winter, not by temperature alone, but by the length of daylight, using it as a more reliable indicator of seasonal transition. You consider that now the way your awareness has shifted toward the light rather than the cold. You take another step, then another, continuing along the path. There is a perspective among historians that hope during long winters was often tied to these gradual, almost imperceptible changes, rather than any sudden improvement in conditions. As you move forward, you understand that idea more clearly. Nothing has become easier, and yet something has changed. You feel it in the way you look ahead, in the way your attention lifts slightly drawn, not just to the ground beneath your feet, but to the space beyond. A less commonly discussed observation suggests that even minimal environmental changes, such as a slightly longer day, could have a meaningful psychological effect, offering a sense of progression in an otherwise unchanging landscape. As you walk, you sense that effect. It does not alter your pace, but it alters your perception. You take a slow breath, then release it, watching it fade into the air. The cottages in the distance appear a little clearer now, their shapes more defined as the light strengthens. You continue toward them, your step steady, your body still carrying the weight of the cold, the fatigue, the quiet strain of movement. Scholars continue to explore how seasonal awareness shaped emotional resilience, how people found ways to measure time and progress even in the most difficult conditions. As you walk, you feel that awareness settling into you. The day is still short, the cold is still present, but the light has begun to stretch. You glance once more toward the sky, then back to the path. The world remains quiet, muted, unchanged in its physical form. And yet within that stillness there is a subtle movement, a quiet shift that suggests something beyond the present moment. You take another step, then another, continuing forward. Not because the path has become easier, but because it continues, and so do you. You slow your steps as the day settles into a quieter rhythm again. Not because the work is finished, but because your body begins to draw inward, carrying with it the long thread of the cold, the movement, the steady effort that has filled the hours. The light remains, but softer now, stretched thin across the land, no longer growing, simply holding its place before it begins to fade once more. You pause for a moment, standing still, letting your breath settle into a slower pattern. The air is still cold, though you no longer react to it in the same way. It rests against you familiar now, something you move within rather than resist. A widely recognized understanding in seasonal history is that winter days followed a quiet cycle where activity rose and fell with the limited light, and evenings arrived not suddenly but gradually as the world dimmed again. As you stand here, you feel that cycle closing gently, without urgency. You turn slightly, your gaze drifting back toward the cottage, its shape steady, unchanged, waiting as it did before. It feels closer now, not in distance, but in meaning. You take a slow step, then another, returning along the same path, your body moving with a quiet familiarity. The ground beneath you holds the same firmness, the same faint traces of frost, though now touched by the fading light. A small but interesting detail sometimes noted in historical observations is that the return to shelter at the end of a winter day carried a particular significance, marking not just the end of work, but a return to warmth, however limited, and to shared space. You feel that now in the steady pull toward the doorway. You reach it without hurry, your hand lifting the covering just enough to step inside. The air shifts immediately, warmer, heavier, familiar. You pause just inside, letting the transition settle over you. The fire still burns, though lower. Now its glow softer, its light more subdued. The room feels quieter, the movement slower, the voices softer. There is a perspective among historians that the evening hours in such environments often encouraged a gradual winding down shaped by diminishing light and the body's natural response to it. As you stand here, you feel that change already beginning. You step closer to the hearth once more, extending your hands toward the fading warmth, not with urgency, but with quiet recognition. This is where the day returns. A lesser-known observation suggests that the repetition of these daily cycles, leaving and returning, enduring and resting, created a rhythm that shaped both physical endurance and mental resilience. You feel that rhythm now, not as something you think about, but as something you move within. You lower yourself slowly back toward the straw, the surface familiar, uneven, but known. You settle into it, adjusting your position, finding a place that holds a little warmth, a little comfort. The sounds of the cottage soften further. The fire crackles gently. The wind outside remains, but distant now filtered through the walls. Scholars continue to explore how these repeated cycles of effort and rest influenced long-term survival, suggesting that the ability to maintain balance between the two was essential. As you lie there, you understand that balance in a quiet, physical way. You take a slow breath, then another. Your body begins to release the tension of the day, not all at once, but gradually as each muscle loosens, each movement slows. The light continues to fade, the room dimming, once more returning to the softer tones of evening. You pull your covering closer, tucking it around you, holding what warmth remains. And then slowly the pace of everything begins to soften. Your breathing lengthens. Your thoughts become quieter. The sounds around you settle into a steady, distant rhythm. You no longer focus on each detail. You simply exist within it. The fire glows faintly. The walls hold. The cold remains beyond them, but for now it feels further away. You take one last slow breath, letting it carry you gently downward into rest. And as the light fades completely, as the room returns to shadow, you drift once more into that quiet, familiar space between waking and sleep. Everything softens, everything slows, and you are carried gently into the stillness. Now your breathing becomes slower, deeper, more even. The sounds of the cottage blend into a soft, distant hum, no longer distinct, no longer demanding attention. The warmth of the fire, though faint, lingers just enough to hold you in a quiet sense of safety. You feel the straw beneath you, the weight of the covering, the steady rhythm of your own breath. Nothing needs to change. Nothing needs to be done. The cold remains outside, held at a distance. Inside, everything settles. Your thoughts drift, no longer focused, no longer sharp. They move slowly like the fading light, soft and unhurried. You do not need to follow them. You simply let them pass. The space around you feels still calm, unchanged. The night returns not as something new, but as something familiar, something you have already known. Your body rests, your breath continues, and the quiet holds you there gently without effort. Sweet dreams,